Alice woke up slowly. What's going on? Her mind raced. There was something hard against her back, and panic immediately made her heart race. Maybe this is still a dream, Alice thought, trying to remember what had happened before she came to her senses. And the new girl seemed to have woken up, came the gruff voice of a woman in the distance. And you say dead no. It's just a dream, Alice reassured herself. Just a nightmare that's about to dissipate, but the smells, the sounds that entered her nostrils and ears were too real for a nightmare. And I wonder where she was brought to us from, came the voice again. Did a cutie like that manage to finish someone off? The voices were rough and unpleasant. Alice struggled to open her eyes and realized she was in a dingy cell. Not at a resort, said a woman, sitting not far from Alice. Several gray-clad prisoners were sitting next to her, and the stare seemed no good. Alice felt fear engulf her entire being. She desperately didn't understand how she had ended up in this casemate. What are you looking at? One of the sitters threw angrily. Alice immediately jumped up, huddled in a corner, and tucked her legs under her. Her heart was racing, her eyes filled with terror. The people in the cell were clearly repeat offenders, with the marks of a hard life on their faces, and the fingers of their hands were littered with various tattoos. Oh, she's going to faint from fear again, one of the sitters grinned. I'm Barbara, muttered the recidivist sitting closest to Alice the Watcher. What's your name? Still dazed, Alice couldn't understand what was happening. Just yesterday she had been in the arms of her husband Daniel on one of Sunny Beach's beaches. Memories came to her like a flashed frame from a movie. Do you remember when we first met? Daniel asked then, smiling. Well, how could anyone forget that? You took me away from my own birthday party and drove me around town all night until it was time to meet the sunrise. Alice smiled. Their whole relationship had been just magical, unbelievable, like an adventure. But now the fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. Alice dreaded every minute spent in that gloomy cell. She was uncomfortable. She couldn't understand how she'd even ended up in this situation in the first place. Did you swallow your tongue? Barbara muttered angrily. The woman got up from her bunk, walked over to Alice and leaned over her threateningly. Talk about sewing someone up, Barbara hissed. Maybe you're too cool to talk to us. And my dear must have just forgotten her tongue on the outside, exclaimed the other. The unpleasant laughter and derogatory remarks of the cellmates made Alice feel even more afraid and helpless. She could feel the despair coursing through her soul. There were tears in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back, afraid to show her weakness. So what did you get raked up for? Barbara muttered. Tell me before you're driven under the bunkhouse. I'm sorry, Alice mumbled, then still tried to explain. I don't understand. Maybe you drank too much champagne at your fancy party, one of Barbara's companions hissed angrily. She stood up, picked up a mug from the table, and splashed Alice in the face with cold water. Alice shuddered, feeling the moisture spreading through her clothes. For what? What have I done? The desperation in her voice was growing with each passing second. Finally, Alice couldn't take it anymore and jumped up from her seat straight to the door. Beginning to pound on the steel-battered barrier, she screamed. Somebody open up. Alice pounded her fists on the cold surface. Suddenly, the small window in the center opened again, and the sleepy face of a guard appeared in the opening. What do you want? Scared, he asked gruffly. Call the supervisor. I need to talk to him. There's some kind of mistake. I'm not supposed to be here, Alice yelled. Girl, you're in the wrong place to ask to see someone. Wait until morning. Maybe you'll get an explanation. Then the guard tossed indifferently. Please, this is important. I need to get to the bottom of this situation. Call the supervisor. Please, Alice continued to plead with hope in her voice. The man only shook his head, maintaining a look of indifference on his face. No one's going to make a request in the middle of the night for someone like you, the policeman muttered. Frankly, if I were you, I wouldn't count on any response during the day either. Alice took a step back, clasping her hands to her chest. Feeling helpless inside, she was forced to accept the rejection. The metal flap slammed shut. The lock clinked. Sitting back in her seat, Alice felt the icy claws of fear clutching her heart. At no time in her life had she ever felt as insignificant as she did now. Alice tried to calm herself, but the fear and bewilderment would not leave her. She did not know how she had ended up in prison. Alice felt completely disconnected from reality. Barbara, who had taunted her earlier, came over and asked, Are you really that stupid, or are you just pretending to be? No, I don't remember anything. I don't even know what date today is, Alice replied with despair in her voice. July 18th, Barbara said with bewilderment. Alice felt a pang in her chest. It had been almost 2 days since she'd been in this nightmarish reality, and that knowledge only added to her sense of despair. Who are you anyway? Softening her voice, Barbara inquired. It seems like just yesterday I married Daniel. We had a wedding on the beach. It was so beautiful, and today, Today I wake up in this prison, Alice began to say. Is that all you have to say? Barbara raised an eyebrow skeptically. My dad died recently, and he left me a pretty good inheritance. But that doesn't explain anything. I've been happy. We were doing well in my marriage to Daniel. Alice shook her head. Memories of her father made her soul feel sad. I guess they said you killed someone, Barbara replied in a lowered voice. What kind of nonsense is that? Who could I have killed? Alice sighed sorrowfully. She felt an inner shock and panic. This realization terrified her, and she still couldn't believe the reality of what was happening. It didn't take long for morning to come. The scowling guard opened his window again, found Alice's gaze, and beckoned her over. You're being summoned, he muttered when he saw the girl come to the door. Warden, Alice asked hopefully. She interjected. Face the wall. The guard swung the door open, pushed her against the nearest wall, turned her around, and clasped her hands painfully. Let go, Alice exclaimed with desperation in her voice. She felt the cold bracelets click on her wrist. The guard roughly took her under the elbow and pushed her out into the hallway. Good morning, sweetheart. A man in an investigator's uniform smiled unpleasantly. My name is John, the first investigating your case, but I wouldn't say I'm glad to meet you, Alice snorted. Her handcuffs were never removed and Alice was forced to sit on the very edge of the uncomfortable chair. Well, I'm sure you'll get used to our conditions, John smiled unpleasantly again. Although perhaps you're ready to confess to your stepfather's death now. After all, you were the one who killed him. What stepfather? My father died recently. Who do you think I am? Alice exclaimed in bewilderment. Well, honey, you don't have to pretend like you don't know. Your fingerprints are at the crime scene, and your DNA evidence confirms your involvement. John tossed some opinion sheets onto the table, pointing to them with his hand in an inviting gesture. Alice rounded her eyes in horror. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. What fingerprints? What does DNA have to do with it? A panicked thought battered at the back of her mind. That's impossible. I didn't kill anyone. I don't even know what crime we're talking about, Alice whispered. Of course you do, of course you do. We've got a whole lot of innocent people here, John nodded. What's this then? The investigator dug through the folder again, then showed Alice the crime scene photos. Some man was lying face down, with blood all around him and shrapnel lying on the floor near his body. What does this man have to do with this? Alice asked in a trembling voice. She could feel the ground slipping from under her feet, and the worry was weighing so heavily on her soul that it was about to tear her apart. That's your business, John marveled. I might as well be. But here the neighbors have absolutely pinpointed the culprit, and even made a sketch. The investigator pointed with his hand to a booth hanging to Alice's right. She turned and stared at her own image. The girl in the sketch looked exactly like her, except the first and last name were different. This is some kind of forgery. It can't be me. Alice felt everything inside her turn over with horror. This sketch was proof that she had something to do with the mysterious crime. Sweetheart, we found you on the seashore. You were lying there unconscious and had no identification on you. Your sketch matched the description given by the witnesses. Therefore, you are now a murder suspect, John said, savoring every word. So that's not my last name. I'm a completely different person. Go to my husband. He will tell you, Alice cried out in despair. We haven't seen any husband yet, he muttered doubtfully. We have, however, discovered a man's belongings on the shore. I suppose your spouse, if there was one, is in distress, either drowned himself or another victim of your criminal tendencies. Alice felt her whole body go numb. She couldn't believe Daniel could have gotten into danger. Ask someone else. My co-workers at work, relatives. But someone has to tell you what my real name is, and you'll even give those people's contacts yourself, she said. John raised an eyebrow skeptically. Yes, now. Alice, finding herself in a serious situation, began to frantically search her memory, trying to recall anyone who could confirm her identity and dispel any doubts that she was innocent. John watched her the whole time, enjoying the desperation of the suspect, but after a couple minutes he was clearly bored with the spectacle. Remember? The investigator inquired in a jumped-up tone. Just a minute. You don't have a minute, John bellowed. He leaned across the table, grabbed Alice by the hair and yanked hard, making her head whip from side to side. Quickly sign the confession. Get to the bunkhouse. I'm not going to be dealing with crap all day. Tears spurted from Alice's eyes. She cried out painfully, feeling the pain pierce her head and travel down her spine. The investigator continued to yell something and threaten, but now his voice sounded as if from far away. Helen, my subordinate at my father's firm, Alice said through sobs. What? John interjected angrily. Helen Savage. She'll confirm that she knows me. The phone or something, not understanding, John interjected. Phone dictate. Stupid, the investigator let go of his hair. Alice sobbed a couple more times, then began confusedly dictating the right numbers. I'll call her. But if this is some kind of joke, you're going to be very sorry, John muttered angrily. Alice stared at the floor in pain and fear. The mind abstracted, preferring to ignore reality. Her gaze froze. After all, she wasn't capable of experiencing so much stress in such a short time, was she? Understand? No, John bellowed, giving Alice a whipping slap. Got it, Alice barely audibly whispered, feeling the blood begin to ooze from her busted lip. Several hours passed, which she spent like this in the investigator's office. Excuse me, Mr. Investigator. There's someone here to see you, came the voice of a guard from behind the door. What's going on here? The blonde shouted indignantly, throwing a lightning-fast glare in the investigator's direction as she barely crossed the threshold of his office. Ah, a friend of the suspect. I guess John shook his head indifferently. Yes, I've known Alice for a long time, and I have every confidence in her innocence. She is the daughter of my boss. And at the time this crime is alleged to have been committed, she was in a completely different location. We have witnesses, documents to prove her alibi, Helen spoke coldly. And we have proof, John parried stiffly. This is some kind of setup. Alice is innocent of anything, and no amount of fingerprints will help you wrangle 50 people who saw her in person at the negotiations on the day of the alleged murder. Alice listened to Helen and John's conversation with mixed feelings of anxiety and hope. At first, she had felt horror and anxiety as she listened to the investigator insist on her guilt and present the evidence. But with Helen's arrival and her confident words of innocence, hope rang within. I'm asking you to leave Alice alone, Helen said peremptorily. Otherwise, we'll have to get the press involved. No press, John retorted sourly. It seemed he had to admit that they simply didn't have enough grounds to accuse Alice. I'm sorry, I think there's been a mix-up, John said reluctantly. Turning to Alice, you may not be the only child in your family. There is a possibility that you had a twin sister. What twins? Alice interjected bitterly. But if you have any other ways to explain the devilishness going on in this case, I'm listening, the man muttered unhappily. A storm of feelings erupted inside Alice. She couldn't understand what this was about or why there was suddenly information about twins. She felt her life falling apart and the footing going out from under her feet. Mixed feelings, confusion, bewilderment, fear overwhelmed her. She realized that she needed to solve this puzzle to understand what was even going on in her life. Helen insisted that Alice be released immediately. Helen, do you know what happened to Daniel? Alice asked first thing. No one has seen him for the last few days, the assistant shrugged. Everyone thought you were on vacation after the wedding. The car began to pull away from the gloomy building, and anxiety grew more and more pronounced in Alice's heart. Are you sure you can manage? Helen asked doubtfully, looking at her superior. Yes, don't worry, Alice dismissed absent-mindedly. All her thoughts were now focused on the search. She ran into the house, literally flew up the second floor to her in her husband's bedroom, and embraced the sight. But there was only emptiness. Where could you have disappeared to? Alice muttered fearfully, looking through Daniel's things. Dialing a familiar number with trembling fingers, she put the phone to her ear, listening to the dial tone with bated breath. Come on, she whispered. It was all to no avail. The phone was silent, as was the empty bedroom, which was unable to clear up the monstrous situation one bit. Alice remembered again how they had planned to spend a romantic vacation on the beach. Trust me, it's going to be awesome, Daniel said with a smile, showing her pictures of golden sand and azure sea. We'll be all alone there, Alice said hesitantly, as if sensing trouble. Well, that's just the opposite of great. Just imagine you, me, the sea, and no one else around. Isn't it a fairy tale? A fairy tale. And if Alice had known how this ill-fated trip would turn out, she would never have agreed to this godforsaken place. Hello, Bill, this is Daniel's wife. Hi, do you have any idea where Daniel might be right now? She said, dialing the number of a fellow spouse they had met at the wedding. Hi, I thought he was on a wedding trip with you, Bill replied doubtfully. And we just missed each other. Sorry to bother you, Alice said. Is something wrong? Do you need help? Bill muttered worriedly. No, sorry, bye. Alice hung up the phone. Her inner feelings were at breaking point. Just out of desperation, Alice opened the message list on her phone, her eyes stumbling upon a text message from the DHS informing her that a major storm was coming. A chilling realization ran through her body. The words that had come almost a week ago never left her. A violent storm. The danger the meteorologists had warned of. Right, how could I have forgotten about the storm? They'd had to postpone the trip. but Daniel had insisted that no forecast of bad weather could interfere with their love. "Okay, I hope you're right," Alice said. Romance and carelessness mixed with champagne that day, and she did nothing to stop her husband. How could I forget that the meteorologists were predicting a major storm that day? We couldn't only give warning. It was our mistake, but reflection and self-deprecation brought no comfort. It was my fault. I should have convinced Daniel not to go ashore, and I remained silent. And now he's probably drowned because of me. Alice's voice trembled with guilt and hopelessness. She tried to hold back the tears, but still they rolled down her cheeks, leaving hot paths behind them. Her breath caught at the thought that she would never see Daniel again, that he might have died because of her own carelessness. "Daniel." "I'm sorry." Alice closed her eyes, trying to dull the pain, but she could feel the guilt pressing on her shoulders like a heavy weight that she must now carry alone. Alice grieved for a few days, but then determination and the desire to find out the truth took over. "I can't sit here in despair any longer," Alice exclaimed, feeling the walls of the empty bedroom literally suffocating her. "Daniel deserves for the truth to come out. I have to find out what happened that day." That being said, it was done. She began contacting people who could help her in this endeavor. One of them was Victor Palick, her late father's former partner. "Alice, I understand you. Losing loved ones is very painful," he said with compassion. "I've known you since you were in diapers, and I'm always ready to help. I have an acquaintance named Andrew. I think he can help with this case." "He'd want to work for me," Alice said doubtfully. "You see, he's got an expensive operation coming up that he doesn't have enough money for. If you're willing to pay well, the guy will get you the very devil out of the ground. Trust me, he's the best detective I know." "Yeah, I'm willing." "It's a small price to pay for the truth." Alice shook her head. "That's good." She clasped her hands to her chest. Feeling mixed emotions inside, Alice was willing to go to any lengths to find answers, even if it did require her to spend an unexpected amount of money. She met Andrew at a small cafe in the center of town. Alice gave him all the information she had on Daniel, directing him to search for him. But she decided to start on the other side, to find traces of her doppelganger. It remained to discuss a plan of action, which they did at a neat coffee shop table. "I understand the mission. We'll try to find Daniel, or at least find out what happened to him." "But what do you need this doppelganger for?" Andrew asked, perplexed. "The investigator just decided to write off an unsolved case on you, so he made up a fairy tale. Is it worth your time? I think if I find it might shed some light on the whole story. Maybe she knows something or has something to do with what happened. We need to find out why I was mistaken for her, and how it's simultaneously connected to Daniel's disappearance," Alice reasoned. "Yeah, maybe there's no doppelganger at all." "What makes you think that's true?" Andrew said. "It's just, it's like a gut feeling that there's a string to pull, and it all happened in the same period of time." Alice's eyes read determination to find out everything, and either find Daniel or mourn his ashes. Andrew nodded, realizing that was the logical course of action. "Okay, let's start by looking for traces of your doppelganger. Perhaps her friends, co-workers, or even family can help. I'll work on that for now, while you continue your own search. And if you find anything, let me know. I think we can solve this mystery together. There's no need to despair before the time." "Thank you," Alice whispered softly. Andrew's reassurance gave her strength, helped her shake off her troubles. Alice arrived in the quiet suburban neighborhood where her copy was said to be living with her stepfather. "What a shithole," Alice muttered, deciding not to waste any time. She headed straight for the house, feeling a mixed sense of anxiety and determination. "Finally, gone somewhere, the wretch. Left me and the kids and went away. And you didn't even tell us when you'd be back," the burly aunt blurted out as she stepped out into the stairwell. "I'm sorry, you have me confused." "I'm not who you thought I was," Alice said doubtfully. "Shameless. Forgetting about your brood and driving off somewhere. So irresponsible," echoed the gaunt man. Alice tried to explain to them that they were wrong. It seemed the neighbors had mistaken her for a double. "Wait a minute, I'm not Anna. You've got me confused." "What are you talking about?" wailed the little man. "Wait," yanked him back doubtfully by his aunt. "There's something wrong. She's kind of frumpy, not at all like our catty." "Exactly. And her features are softer and her eyes look different," the man muttered, immediately replacing anger with curiosity. "My name is Greg, and this is my wife Irene. Excuse me, but who is Katie and where is she now?" Alice interjected. "And she went away a long time ago. Left us with the kids. Didn't say when she'd be back. And didn't tell me anything at all," Greg grumbled resentfully. "Yeah, you two seem to be a lot alike, like sisters. Katie lived here with her mom until she died. Her stepfather drank and abused her from childhood," Irene said in a lowered voice. "And then he was found dead with a knife in his back. They suspect Katie killed him and ran away. I warned him not to torture a girl so much." Alice listened to the neighbors, feeling mixed emotions. She realized that she had a very mysterious story to tell, and she wanted to know more. The tale shocked her. "It's unbelievable. I couldn't even imagine that I could have a sister. So where is she now?" In a trembling voice, Alice asked again. "Oh, we don't know," Irene shrugged. "She was missing when the incident happened. The kids, 3 of them you can imagine, were put in an orphanage." Looking at her neighbor, Alice felt the bitter pain and simultaneous joy of knowing she might have a family, new relatives. "Wow," Alice thought to herself. She sat in the car, staring at the orphanage where she was headed to see her nephews. The phone rang and she saw that it was Andrew, detective, who was helping her with the investigation. "Hey, what's up?" she said tiredly. "I found some interesting information. It turns out that shortly before he was lost at sea, Daniel took out life insurance on his life for a substantial sum. The beneficiary of the insurance is listed as an unknown girl." Alice shuddered and pressed the phone harder against her ear. Her heart began to beat faster. "How's that? Tell me more about it." "I'm going to check for additional details, but it seems Daniel was able to insure his life for some ulterior purpose. It's kind of weird. I think we should find out who the girl is and why Daniel left her," the insurance Andrew said. Shock rippled through Alice's body. She was slowly realizing that her husband, her beloved and closest person, might have married her for some obscure purpose, only to die afterwards and leave the money to some unknown person. The thought seemed both absurd and eerie at the same time. "I can't believe it. It's horrible. What kind of person would do such a thing? And who is she, this girl? We must certainly find out. Of course, I won't give up the search. Let's see this investigation through to the end." Andrew's voice began to get lost in the storm of emotions that such strange news left behind. "Okay, sorry, I've got a case. I need to finish it. Need any help? I'm out of town. I think I can handle it. I'll be in touch if you need anything," Alice said. Andrew dropped the call. There was a short beep on the speaker. Alice entered the orphanage. 3 little kids of about 5 years old, playing in the hallway and unaware that their Aunt Alice had come to meet them, caught her eye. My heart sank. There was too much character in their faces, and they were similar to each other, giving away their origins. "Hello, who are you here to see?" the woman asked, smiling at Alice. "You know, I have a strange request," Alice mumbled. At that moment, her heart beat harder. Alice wanted to make sure that she was really related to these children. "Could you give me samples for DNA testing on these kids over here?" Alice said, pointing to her nephews. "I don't know what you mean," the woman frowned. "I recently found out that I might be related to them, and I'd like to run a test. If it turns out to be correct, I can take the children, can't I?" Alice could feel the excitement twisting everything inside. When she had come to the clinic to have the DNA test done to confirm her parentage, the doctor had immediately warned her that she would have to wait. "And how could it even come to this?" Alice muttered, rubbing her palms together nervously. She waited for the results of the tests with hope and fear, which was already habitually present in her life, only changing its appearance from time to time. Finally, the result was ready. "Well, here are your tests," the lab technician said, holding out an envelope. "The result is positive. Congratulations, or is it sympathy? I don't know what your reason for doing this test was." Listening to his words, Alice shook with excitement. She slowly opened the form and carefully read the small lines. Soon she was back in the orphanage director's office, holding the papers with the results. Her heart was beating harder than ever. "Hello, Alice Wright. What a familiar face you have. What can I do for you?" the principal asked. "Yes, that's right. I came back with the results of the DNA test. The children that were given to you a while ago are my nephews. The test confirmed the parentage," replied Alice. The principal was stunned by the news, but then his face suddenly lit up with memories, as if he finally realized why she seemed familiar. "You know, I have a great memory for alumni," the principal said cryptically. "But age, I repent. It's only just now dawned on me." "Why? It seems as if I've seen you before," Alice marveled. "Really, yes, I remember that girl and their mother, and you when you were barely older than your nephews. You were sisters, and then you were separated as infants. But not me. I was working as a caretaker at the time, and had no influence on anything." Once again, Alice felt her heart clench at the truth that had been revealed. Just like that, a phrase dropped so easily had completely shattered the life she was used to. "Yeah, it's weird. I was sure that I was my parents' own daughter, and now I realized that I always felt something was wrong." Tears came to her eyes. Trying to save face, Alice furtively wiped them from the corners of her eyes, but the gesture didn't escape the principal's notice. "This is a difficult moment, but it's also a chance to be reunited with your family. I hope you can help them once things are settled, he said. Alice felt joy, but also fear and uncertainty about the future. But she knew she now had a purpose to be who she really was and to take care of her real family. After a very long time, Alice returned to the principal's office once again. His name was Christopher Valentine, and this time they had time to get to know each other properly. It wasn't easy. I spent a week trying to get all the right papers together, going through a lot of restrictions and red tape. But when I saw their smiles, when they saw me for the first time, all the difficulties turned out to be for naught, Alice said softly. Christopher Valentine looked at the newfound guardian of 3 little ones with a smile and nodded at her. You know, no hardship can compare to the joy you have brought to these children and their smiles, a reward for your selfless care. Alice smiled and sighed. Thank you, Christopher Valentine. I must do everything in my power to provide them with a better future. The joy of motherhood, unavailable to Alice before, colored her life with pleasant colors. However, the shadow of the unknown still lay over the story of Daniel and missing Katie. Alice met Andrew at the cafe to discuss the results of his investigations. Well, did you find anything new? Alice asked. Barely had he crossed the threshold of the coffee shop. Yes. Alice, I found the name of the girl who was supposed to be paid the insurance money on Daniel's policy. Her name is Lucy Crawford, Andrew replied. Alice paled slightly when she heard the name. She had heard it before, hadn't she? Lucy Crawford. Turns out Lucy worked as a secretary in the department of your company that Daniel headed. It turns out my little investigation uncovered a little more curious details. What curious details? Alice asked. Andrew's words left Alice perplexed and alarmed. Why would the secretary receive an insurance payout after his death? Why not me or his relatives, she thought. I think a little. Alice, you're not a stupid woman. Andrew shook his head. Of course, we don't know all the details, but from all appearances, there was an affair between her and Daniel. That relationship could have gone very far and apparently led to something bad. Alice froze, trying not to breathe. It seemed that one careless movement and she would crumble. The secretary's affair with her husband, the insurance policy, all pointed to the fact that she might have been involved in his death. Maybe she's the killer? Alice's mind flashed. She leaned back in her chair. A heavy feeling of disappointment and loss came over her. Alice picked up her briefcase, looked up, and headed in the direction of human resources. She hoped to find out how to contact Lucy Crawford so she could locate her and get to the bottom of this situation. Hello, I'm looking for information on an employee of Lucy's. I need to get in touch with her, Alice said. When the human resources manager came out to her, she looked at Alice with surprise and then smiled. Lucy Crawford. You mean the former employee? I mean, she quit just a day ago, decided to move to another company. He didn't even do her 2 weeks. I don't know who her patron is, the manager replied. Alice was shocked. Why did she quit? Where does she work now? That's the thing. Moved to our competitors after leaving her application just a day ago. Said they offered her more favorable terms, but it's strange that she left so suddenly. Alice realized that her target had slipped away at the last moment. She needed to find Lucy and find out the truth, but that was proving more difficult than she had expected. Andrew didn't call until a few days later, when Alice was finally desperate to find anything. Alice, I've managed to track Lucy down, and I have good news, Andrew announced from the doorstep. Months of investigation and constant communication had melted the ice between them. Now they were a little closer than just colleagues. Andrew even caught himself thinking that Alice sympathized with him as a woman, but he wasn't in a hurry to give in to his feelings. What is it? Tell me already, Alice said impatiently. It turns out that Daniel is alive. Andrew immediately stunned her, and he was closer than you think. Not far away at all, in a cabin in the woods, almost near the edge of your town. Alice felt a whole wave of feelings. When Andrew had informed her that Daniel was hiding near their house, at first it had been surprise, how was that even possible? Then relief at the thought that her husband was still alive. However, that was quickly replaced by other dark emotions. I didn't want to bother you right away. That's why I called the police to begin with, Andrew continued cautiously. What, they detained him? Why did you decide that without me? I just did my job, Andrew shrugged. I didn't piss you off for helping me find the truth, not to put my husband behind bars. That's what interrogations are for, among other things, to find the truth. I'm sorry, Alice, but Daniel confessed to everything. Andrew shook his head regretfully. To everything he said. Told me that his intentions were unfair to you. He knew the code to your safe and was going to rob the house, just waiting for the right time. Ah, I can't believe it. He was willing to do that in his own house. As Alice realized the news about Daniel, her soul filled with a mixture of grief, disappointment, and a sense of betrayal that expressed itself in tears on her cheeks. Yes, that's exactly right. But thanks to the quick work of the police officers, we were able to thwart his plans. He repented and signed a clean confession. Andrew tried to support his friend. Yeah, it's hard to digest, Alice muttered, looking down at the floor. We've been through so much already. Now this. But I guess the important thing is that he's alive and will be punished for his actions. Yeah, it's not your fault he turned out to be a criminal. A fake death for insurance for a mistress. A robbery. He didn't deserve all that. But at least Daniel can't do any more harm. That must be hard. But you have to remember, you have those who are there to support you at any time. Thank you, Andrew. You've done so much, Alice whispered, shaking her head. Always happy to help. You're a strong woman, you're sure to get through this. Tears rolled down her cheeks, leaving salty trails. After Daniel's capture, the days stretched on. Andrew had offered to arrange a date with her ex-husband, but Alice had refused, not wanting to see the unhappy traitor. Now she wanted to concentrate on getting on with her life and regaining some semblance of footing. One day, Alice decided to call the office to see if everything was all right. Helen, as usual, answered her call in a businesslike manner, but the conversation suddenly descended into strange happenings. Alice, how are you? We've been worried about you, Helen said. Thank you. Yes, more or less. But we need to move on somehow. I understand we haven't worried you, but do you know about Lucy yet? What happened to her? Alice was wary. An ominous foreboding settled in her soul. Turns out she just betrayed Daniel, and it looks like she started gathering some dirt on her new bosses, Helen said. They fired her, set up an internal investigation, and then concluded that she was involved in insurance fraud. So Lucy ended up in jail too, just like your ex-spouse. It's kind of a nightmare. All the seemingly familiar people have turned out to be crooks. I feel like my life has changed irrevocably. Alice realized that she needed to move on despite all the obstacles, but she was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. In a big cozy house surrounded by greenery and flowers, she took care of her family, setting up house for the children, building place and play and learn. These boys were like her own children to her now. She did her best to make their lives happy and carefree. The little ones, barely learning to talk, were full of energy and questions. Alice taught them by playing interesting educational games and helped them explore the world around them. In the evenings, they gathered together in the living room. Alice read stories before bedtime. After a while, Alice and Andrew stayed in a small room after the operation. There was silence, and both realized that they now had a chance to talk alone. Thank you, Alice, for finding the strength to talk me into this examination. I didn't think I'd ever walk normally. You're a brave man, Andrew said. You've overcome so much in life. I was sure you could do it, Alice replied. But I have to say, I couldn't have done it without your support. You've always been there for me. And I'm very grateful for that, Andrew smiled softly. Friends are supposed to help each other through the hardest moments, Alice smiled back timidly. I want you to know how grateful I am to you. I mean, you literally changed my life, Andrew said. And you changed mine too, Alice replied. Their eyes met, and in that moment, words became superfluous. Smiles of happiness and gratitude played on their faces. They knew they now had their whole lives to share together. The hospital room was filled with soft light streaming in through the half-closed curtains. Andrew lay on the bunk while Alice sat next to him, holding his hand in hers. It was at that moment that they realized something had changed between them. Alice, I feel like I've gotten to know you better than I ever have. You're so caring, so kind, Andrew said. It's been mutual. You were the only one who stayed by my side when things were hard for me, Alice replied. Their hands began to squeeze each other tighter. Andrew, the moment our eyes meet, I realize that I feel something more than friendship for you. I like you, Alice whispered, desperately embarrassed. Her heart pounded in her chest, making her whole body tremble with excitement and fear. She had decided to take this step, no matter what, because she wanted to be honest with herself and with the man she could love. Me too, Alice, I can't imagine my life without you. You fill my heart with warmth and happiness, Andrew replied. They drew closer to each other and their lips joined in a tender kiss that was full of feeling and promise. Their love, which had arisen at the most inopportune moment, turned out to be real and strong, ready to cope with any difficulty. Katie's babies had long since grown accustomed to Alice's home and were an endless source of joy and laughter for their new caring mom. She hired a nanny for them, who took care of the children in her absence. But as it happens, even the most caring nanny didn't always have time for everything, especially considering the 3 active toddlers. Recently, the children started talking about something strange. They claimed to have seen their mom when no one was home. This woman was sad, but always read them stories, talked and comforted them. They said that Katie would come to them in their room. That sounds kind of weird. I think you should seek medical help, consult some doctor, although it could just be a childish fantasy. But yes, Andrew, you're right. We can't let this go unchecked. These are my children, and I don't want them to be threatened by anything, Alice said. At first, she thought it was just a fantasy, but as time went on, she began to notice strange things. Food was disappearing from the refrigerator. Things were moving around, and she felt like someone was watching her. This caused her anxiety and even some fear. Andrew moved into Alice's house, and together they decided to start solving the mysterious incidents that were happening to the children. They set up cameras in the house, hoping to record anything that might explain the children's strange stories. Andrew went on duty. He stayed up nights studying the camera footage and waiting for any unusual events to occur. But the long nights passed without any sign of any obvious manifestations of mysticism. He began to think more and more often that the children were badly mistaken, and perhaps this was just a figment of their imagination. A few days later, when everyone had decided that the children had simply made up the story and the night watch had been lifted, the little ones again said that Mommy was coming. This conversation caused Alice and Andrew to turn on the video cameras again, and their attention was drawn to the screen. "Do you see this? She comes at night to see the kids. It's really catty," my sister Alice exhaled excitedly. "I wonder what made her come back after all these months. I don't know, maybe she sensed the boys were in danger, or maybe she needs to pass something on. Let's find a way to contact her. Figure it out." "But she comes on her own. Just waiting for another visit is enough," Andrew shrugged. "Yeah, we can't miss the chance to find out the truth. Why she's back and where she's been disappearing to in the first place," Alice agreed. And then one night they finally had their luck. Katie sneaked back into the house, thinking everyone was asleep. But Andrew and Alice were ready, meeting her right in the hallway. "Katie, hello there. We need some answers. Why are you coming back like a thief now?" Alice asked. "Yeah, I come to see them, to be closer to them. But I didn't hurt anyone," replied the guest fearfully. "We've seen the camera footage, and we know you come when everyone is already asleep. Why all the secrecy?" Andrew frowned. "Please understand me. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be around the kids," replied Katie. "Then why did you disappear? We all thought you were in trouble or dead." "What happened?" Alice asked, softening her voice a little. "A man owed a lot of money," began Katie explaining. "And when he realized he didn't have it, he decided to bail me out, said he didn't need me anymore. But I guess they weren't happy with that exchange," Andrew said. "No," Katie shook her head sadly. "They killed him, and then they came after me as a witness." A confused but determined Alice walked over to her sister, who was shuffling nervously from foot to foot at the door. "Katie, I'm sorry you've been through all this. We can help you, but you need to cooperate with us. Turn yourself in to the police. Running away is not the answer. Let's talk about how we can do this so you can be exonerated." "You don't understand. I didn't kill my stepfather. It was his drinking buddies. They were behind the horror," Katie said with tears in her eyes. "I believe you. We'll get a good lawyer." "Yes, Katie, I know a good one. He's a real professional. He'll work on your case and prove that you're innocent. All we need is your consent to find out," Andrew said confidently. "Do you think it'll work?" Katie asked hopefully. "Absolutely," Alice nodded. "We won't leave you in the lurch. We're family." Katie, still covered in tears, hesitated at first, but then she took a deep breath and nodded firmly. "I don't want to run and hide anymore," she said. The police and Andrew breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that they were on the right track. Alice put her arms around her sister and stroked her back, comforting her. "It's the right thing to do. Katie will be by your side every step of the way." While Katie provided information to the lawyer, Andrew, like a true detective, continued his investigation. He checked all available evidence, conducted interviews, and soon conclusive evidence was found that Katie was innocent. Alice and Andrew supported her. They came to see her when she was in custody, discussed plans with her lawyer, and were always there to support her morally. Every look, every gesture said that they believed in her innocence, and finally the big day arrived. In court, all the evidence prepared by Andrew was presented, and after much debate, the court announced the verdict. "Katie, you are acquitted. Your innocence has been recognized by the court. You are hereby acquitted of all charges." Alice, Andrew, and Katie hugged each other joyfully. Tears of happiness came from all three of them, and it united them even more. Sitting in her cozy home, Alice decided to share some important news with her lover. Her heart was full of joy. She believed that Andrew would share her happiness, although she was a little apprehensive. "Andrew, I'm pregnant," Alice breathed out and stood waiting. "Alice, I love you very much," Andrew replied. They embraced, knowing that their future would be filled with joy and happiness. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Barbara suddenly interrupted their unity. Yes, is something wrong?" Alice and Andrew were immediately alarmed. "No, I mean with the children." Barbara lowered her gaze. "What is it?" Andrew intervened. "Alice, I'm sorry for reacting so emotionally. When I saw that mark on Katie's arm, it just shocked me. What's wrong? Why are you so worried? I saw the birthmark today. And it's exactly like the one on my daughter that I gave birth to many years ago. Are you sure?" Andrew questioned warily, shifting his gaze from his nanny to his lover. "Yes, that's for sure. I gave birth to 2 twin girls many years ago. I've long despaired of meeting them, but now with this mole, I have my eye on Alice." Alice felt her heart begin to beat more frequently. The conversation was too exciting not to affect her, but Alice was hardly prepared for the turmoil Valentina wanted to unleash on her. Sobbing but looking at the young people, she decided to share what had long weighed on her soul. Bitter memories came to the surface, and she began to tell her story. "A long time ago, when you, Katie, were just born, my husband met me at the maternity hospital," Nanny said bitterly. "He was so happy, so joyful, so full of hope, but everything changed very quickly. It was like he turned out to be someone I didn't know. When he found out you were born, he started celebrating with his friends. One day, another. another, and then he just went on a bender, and suddenly our whole life was nothing but fear and violence. Alice listened with a shudder, realizing that this horror story was actually a chronicle of her real family. It was frightening to even imagine how much her mother had to endure. It was as if the weight of having children had changed him. He became more dangerous and tougher. He drank, beat me, disappeared nights unknown where Valentina continued in a trembling voice. One day, in one of the worst moments, I grabbed a knife. It was all over. I don't remember how it happened, but I did it. I ended up being arrested and sent to jail. You went through such horrors, and it's all because of us, Alice whispered sadly. No, it had nothing to do with the girls. Valentina tried to calm herself. I lost my freedom, and you ended up in the little house, and then in the orphanage. All these years I searched for you, but the traces were lost. You ended up in a rich family, and Katie stayed poor. So I'm the bad mother, since I couldn't keep you from all those horrors. Alice hugged Valentina, trying to comfort her mother, who had experienced so much suffering and loss. I can't imagine how much suffering you've been through. But we're together now. It's all in the past, thank you. Alice, I hope nothing can ever keep us apart again. I'm sorry. I overheard you, came Katie's voice suddenly. She had been standing in the doorway all this time, leaning her shoulder against the jamb. Well, come to us quickly, then exclaimed Alice. The women gathered in the parlor to talk about what had happened. It was necessary to reveal the cards to the end, so that no more secrets should poison the life of their family. Katie looked very depressed, but was finally ready to tell her story too. I met my baby's father back in high school. We were classmates and started dating after graduation when he left for the army. I waited for him to come back. He came back. We got married. He became a trucker, and one day there was a terrible accident. He was gone. Katie, I can't even imagine what you've been through, Alice said bitterly. Yes, after he died, I lost the meaning of life, thought it was better to die. But my children, my little ones, they saved me from that terrible mistake. I realized that they were the only thing I had left in this world, and I did everything I could to protect them and give them a good future. Yes, you are very strong, but now we can take care of our loved ones together. Since fate has brought us together, I'm sure, Alice said, we'll be together and we'll be fine. Yes, Katie, we'll support you. You're not alone anymore. You have both your sister and your mom, and we'll do anything to help each other. Barbara hugged her daughter gently. Many tears were shed that day, but in the end, the family came together, and a future filled with hope and love awaited them. Claire looked apprehensively at the class she was about to be the new girl in. Her father had gotten a high appointment in this town. Like they weren't doing well in New York. No, he needed a springboard to advance his career. His old position had become too tight for his ambitions. Now they'd have to spend about 5 years here. Her arrival did not arouse much interest in her classmates. Well, a new girl came. That's fine. Everyone was talking animatedly about the summer vacation that had just ended. There were some remarks to her. Mom sent me to the country. I was stuck in the vegetable garden, picking all the crops. It's good that there is a lake in the village. We went fishing every other day. Then we fried fish on the shore on the coals from the fire. Girls, look what a sundress I got at the sea. Girls. All the boys looked at me. I was so pretty. Near the window, 2 slightly funny bespectacled men, a girl and a guy, were talking to each other about the list of additional literature for extracurricular reading. No, I never got into this Shakespeare and his Hamlet, said the guy. But Remarque's Three Comrades is a thing. I reread it twice. And I took up the Master and Margarita ahead of time, replied the girl. I couldn't tear myself away. I swallowed it. You haven't read it yet? I'll bring you the novel tomorrow. It's definitely your type. Claire remembered similar conversations after long vacations at school in Moscow. Heaven and earth, a completely different world and life. How could she share with her new classmates that she'd sunbathed on France's Côte d'Azur this summer and then traveled with her parents to the Greek island of Crete, exploring the traces of civilization? They would have gawked at her as if she were an alien. But there was no choice. One had to get used to it and settle in. And she wasn't proud or imagining she'd been born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Hannah had managed to catch her parents' life and her own in a communal apartment with 4 families in the neighborhood. Then her father dramatically moved up the career ladder. A designer by trade, he invented something for the airplane industry. Hannah was never interested in the details. Nevertheless, he had first been invited to work in New York City from the suburbs, and now he was sent to head a new industrial plant in the Northwest, built specifically for his brilliant, undoubtedly talented invention. Hannah's mother didn't come from a wealthy family. She started out as a manicure and pedicure master in New York City. Her husband, with fabulous fees for new technical ideas, helped her buy out a rundown hair salon. In a year, a woman with golden hands, turned the institution into an elite salon. She followed her husband like a Decembrist wife. Is it possible that women don't go for manicures and pedicures? Will she be in demand in the new place? In a medium-sized town, the family of a designer, and now the head of a large company. 3-room apartments in a new building were allocated to them immediately. You can't miss such a specialist. Who could replace him? He is constantly generating new inventions. In an apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, they were looking for a beauty parlor manager. Hannah's mother came in handy from the get-go. What was Hannah supposed to do? She couldn't live a sheltered life. Now it was a 3-stop bus ride to school. It's a short distance. In good weather you could easily walk it. That's how she ended up in 10th grade. It was still 2 years until she received her matriculation certificate. When the bell finally rang on September 1st, the class teacher introduced the newcomer to the class and looked around. We don't have a lot of desks in the classroom. You, Hannah, have only one seat next to our local star Robin Kovalev. Here he is, late as usual. The table was the last one in the middle row. Claire looked back at her newly arrived classmate. Tall, statuesque, handsome, with mischievous eyes. He was wearing jeans and a blue polo shirt that fit him well. You could sit at the same desk with a guy like that, since there were no other options. He and Robin were silent for the first 2 classes, and then they talked about everything. The guy wasn't as well-read as she was, didn't watch some movies and didn't read many books, except for internet videos. He had never traveled further than Miami and had only seen this sea, had not been to New York, Washington. About Europe and other continents, where Claire had already been, she immediately kept silent. But he could definitely give her a head start on domestic matters. He fixed Claire's broken backpack in seconds. And when the homeroom teacher was handing out tickets to the touring production of Michael Rochan's Valentine, and Valentine, Robin had gotten them the 2 best seats. It was a gift from their parents to all the students in honor of the start of the school year. Getting into their drama theater during the arrival of the capital's artists wasn't easy. So Claire and Robin became fast friends that no one noticed how the formidable Robin Kovalev fell in love with the new girl at first sight. It was written all over his face. Claire accepted his attentions condescendingly. After the play, she let him walk her out, but she wouldn't let him kiss her in the entryway yet. She was a girl with old-fashioned views and principles, wouldn't kiss a guy after 3 days of dating. On the way, she told Robin about famous actors and the meaning of Rochan's play, but he never understood the meaning of the title. He remained silent. He didn't want to seem like a silly man, far from the theater arts. What bothered him was a meeting he'd set up with some guys from the neighborhood about some, as they put it, proposal of interest to him. He and Claire were from different families. He'd never had any extra money at home. His parents, tobacco factory workers, breathed tobacco dust all day and sold the surplus off the line to the neighbors. Robin had an older brother who was already married. They all lived in an old private house with green shutters on the windows and a wooden porch that creaked under the footsteps of adults. Robin's parents already had 2 grandchildren running around in the yard, and everyone had to be clothed and fed. So the guy had long ago adapted to part-time work, selling surplus cigarettes to passers-by or unloading trucks near the grocery store on weekends. So he bought his jeans, in which he flaunted in front of his classmates, and a fashionable polo shirt himself. And now he was feverishly thinking about what kind of lucrative offer the older guys from the neighboring neighborhood had decided to make him. They looked a little criminal. Yeah, well, he's not the shy type either. He'll figure it out. If he can make some money, he'll take Claire to the movies, back row. Maybe she'll finally let him kiss her. That dream made him shiver with desire. Claire didn't feel the same way. The timid advances of the first guy in the new place had only boosted her self-esteem. But she was a little bored with him. Where was she and where was he? It's ridiculous to think of them as a couple. She even told her mom that she had a devoted beau. But she'd said, "You should be thinking about your studies, Claire. With your looks and my ability to emphasize them, you will always be worthy of many." Claire smiled contentedly. The burning interest from a cute boy is still nice to me. Mommy, we'll see there. What's the best thing to use him for? At this moment, the cute guy was just approaching the meeting place with potential employers in the vacant lot. There was no fear. At stake was a date with Claire, for whom he was ready to get the moon out of the sky. There was one female among the silent crowd that soon surrounded him. Even though he loved his high school sweetheart, Robin was a little taken aback. At first, she was beautiful. Her loose hair swept down her formidable back in a wave of red, and her green eyes looked boldly at the dashing crowd of young men, not at all embarrassed by their formidable appearance. She was built like Aphrodite, brave like the warlike Athena, and made for love like the beautiful Venus. Robin wasn't very familiar with Greek and Roman mythology, but that was the image the young woman conjured up. Pushing this beautiful vision aside, a large guy with angry wolf eyes, the leader of the group with a huge ego, stepped forward. "So that's what you are, the local Caliban. I've heard rumors of your technical talents. Rumor has it you can pick any lock with 2 pops. Are people lying or stories?" Robin did indeed help everyone in the neighborhood all the time. People would lose their keys to their apartment or garage, or something would get stuck or break, leaving the owners unable to use the mechanism. He'd come over, click a couple times, and everything would work like clockwork. Or at least it would open, allowing eager neighbors to enter. "It's not much of a science," the big guy said. "My father worked all his life as an adjuster on the line, and taught his sons a few things along the way. People do not lie. I'm friends with locks of almost any complexity. What do you want?" "Don't push your luck," Kid, the leader of the local gang, cut him off. "We have a proposition for you, a favorable one for all of us. I won't keep you waiting in riddles. All genius is simple. You'll open the cars for us, the ones we tell you to open. We'll pay you handsomely for your talents. Think about it for 3 days. We await your decision." Robin looked at the leader in silence, at the members of the group, at the smiling girl. He didn't think much about it, so he answered right away. "Why wait 3 days? I'm in." Everyone around him breathed a sigh of relief. The leader of the street group extended his hand, and then also patted him approvingly on the shoulder, saying, "And the man, as Vysotsky has it, a proven comrade of ours." Robin opened the first car the next day. The rest was not his concern. He'd gotten his share of the money that very evening. Now he had the means to invite Claire not only to a movie, but also to a cafe beforehand. The carousel spun, the money flowed. The guy didn't think about the consequences. Fate was keeping him safe for now. Robin and Claire went not only to a fancy restaurant, to a concert of a rock band in a closed club, to an exhibition of impressionist painters, where they couldn't understand a single picture, but also went to a country entertainment center, with kebabs and a heated pool in the fresh air. Things weren't moving. Claire wouldn't let the guy anywhere near her body or her soul. He didn't know how to make her reciprocate his feelings, and agonized with this uncertainty all the time. He wanted to ask her directly, "Are we together, or are you just playing with me?" One day, once again, he tried to press her against the wall in the entryway. They pressed their lips together, but she pushed him away. "Robin." She called him often when they were alone together. "Who the hell do you think you are? That's not why we're friends anymore. We're from parallel worlds in culture, development, intelligence. Do you remember the play Valentine and Valentina? It was about couples like you and me. Be thankful I'm still spending time with you, but don't ever let go." That hat doesn't fit Robin at all. He left, slamming the front door loudly, and he was gone for a long time. At school, he moved abruptly to another desk, putting the right bespectacled boy next to Claire. After school, he didn't see her off, didn't ask her to go for a walk, didn't put chocolates or apples in her backpack. New Year's Eve passed. Winter vacation flashed by. To Claire and her mother did not get bored. Her father took them to the hot Miami to bask in the sun. In January, the girl returned rested and tanned. And there ran the days of the longest quarter. There was no time to think. She didn't even look at Robin. They were friends. They stopped being friends. It happens when you're young. And Robin had gone off to experiment with car theft. He didn't get disturbed very often, once a week or even twice a week. It usually took him no more than a couple of minutes to work with the lock, and often with the alarm system. The car had no time to make a pitiful squeak, and already changed the owner. And everything would have gone on smoothly, but once again, at the resale gang of hijackers punctured. The owner of the car was a certain influential official. The criminals were caught quickly, and did not treat them with ceremony for a long time. The longest sentence was given to Mickey, but the others were to spend more than a year in prison. None of the boys mentioned Robin. They kept their mouths shut. He got off scot-free. Good thing the kid was in the habit of saving up his stash. He changed his clothes, kissed his family, gave presents, and laid low. Senior year's coming up. He wasn't getting good grades, and after school he had to go somewhere to study. He could use a little capital. Robin tried to tear Claire out of his soul, but she stayed there like a splinter. Sometimes he said to himself, well, I'm not Valentine. She's not my Valentine. It's not fate. He met the girlfriend of the leader of their street team at the store by chance. She had faded. She was buying cigarettes for herself in front of his eyes, not the most expensive ones. What did she have enough money for? Slid a casual glance at him. Hannah didn't recognize him at first, but then she perked up. Are you out, Robin? Skipping school? Why don't you buy the lady some champagne? I'm starting to forget what champagne tastes like. Easy, Robin said in her tone of voice. Pick whichever one's looking at you in the window. Hannah, a sultry redhead, chose a local red sparkling wine that tasted good. She bought a box of assorted cakes, a slice of cheese, and a bag of mixed nuts. Taking Robin under her arm, she whispered languidly in his ear. Come to my place. I'm home alone now. Ricarda is dying of boredom and boredom. Already what has come to what soap operas on TV began to watch, when in his stall behind the counter is not standing behind the counter. The owner is such a jerk, he hasn't paid my salary for 2 weeks. He says it's a small turnover. What am I supposed to eat, pray tell? Robin's legs were starting to feel wobbly. This mature, experienced girl had him worried sick. At 16, who wouldn't want to have a peek at a woman like that? He quickly mumbled. I'll be right back, and went back to the store. He'd have to get the redhead something special. But what would he find in a regular supermarket? The idea came quickly he'd spoil her a little. He stuffed a bag full of tropical fruit, a carton of the most expensive cigarettes, a bottle of Armenian cognac. Robin rushed outside, hoping that his vision in female form hadn't evaporated. Hannah waited for him patiently. She must have been desperate for money. She looked greedily into his bag, approved. You're a good-looking boy, and looks quite nice, and you are a friend of the head. Come here. We're announcing an after-hours party tonight. Call your parents and tell them you're staying at a friend's house. I like to take long walks, take my time. Robin's feet hit the ground when she said that. He had texted something on the phone to his parents that he would be unloading cars all night and then spending the night at a buddy's place near the mall. His parents haven't controlled his personal life in a long time. He goes to school, doesn't skip class. That's good enough. Moreover, it's a day off Sunday. No need to go to school tomorrow. Let the boy have fun as he wants. It's a young thing, fun, no need for money, and they don't have a penny to spare. Hannah didn't live in the palace Robin had imagined. It was an old, shabby, 2-story house. It had clearly been built a long time ago. The entryway smelled, as usual, of sauerkraut and a little bit of cats and mice. A couple of stray cats were just warming themselves near the radiator on a thin cardboard. I'm so sick of you two, Hannah kicked one of them angrily. In another time, Robin would have stood up for these stray animals, but now he remained fearfully silent. This woman was leading him into an unknown world. He was afraid of spoiling the romance of the imminent moment. As promised, Hannah's celebration of their meeting was very leisurely. She asked him to open both champagne and cognac, but she mixed them together in tall, thin glasses, squeezed juice from large oranges, cut up fruit, enjoyed nuts and elite cheese. Then she suddenly announced to Robin that she was hot and had to change right in her room, and she didn't think to leave for the bathroom. The experienced Amazon and the young tough guy made a great duo. The rest of the winter flashed by. In an instant, Robin was running to his goddess like a faithful knight, henchman, servant. The stash had long since been retrieved from its hiding place. Hannah's appetite had grown by leaps and bounds. His supplies were no longer enough for new boots or pearl earrings. It was a strange affair, no matter how you looked at it. Robin was ready to become her slave. Every time he was with her, it was as if he were dying and being reborn from the thrill of sensuality. He was jealous of Mickey, who was now in jail, painting pictures of her with him. Thoughts of Claire vanished from Robin's mind almost without a trace. So she sometimes briefly resurfaced in Robin's mind, along with the urge to say, "You should see what a gorgeous woman I have in my arms right now. You're no match for me, and you kept calling me Mr. Poor man, smoking all the time. We're not a couple." Claire went to school pensive. At home, her father's company wasn't good. Somewhere up there was a change of leadership. Directives came one after the other, and they were all kind of silly, like commands: "Stop there, come here." These constant swings were undermining the company from the inside. Claire's father kept saying he was going to quit the whole thing. He wasn't a boy to be bullied like that. The women in the family had thought he was joking at first, relieving the tension by yelling at them both. But his character was deteriorating before their eyes. In the clinic, where the woman, frightened by such actions, went, the psychotherapist nodded understandingly. This is a midlife crisis, which fell for a man at a difficult time in his professional life. If you want to save him from an early stroke or heart attack, it is better to let him uncompromisingly quit than to suffer another humiliation from his bosses. That same evening, a major family conversation took place in their home. Claire's mother even took time off work for the occasion and prepared a special dinner. She didn't keep the problem from her daughter. She also told her husband directly what awaited him if he stayed at his old job. We all made a decision together with drawings and ideas. Out. A bright design head like that can be useful anywhere. Claire's father at first refused all translated arrows on the fact that they will lose a lot in material terms, but his wife was a stubborn woman, and she loved her husband dearly. "We need you alive and well, and we'll earn the rest with a stranger. We'll do it. Haven't we afforded ourselves enough? Eating good food, dressing nicely, spending money freely on trips. You and me, honey, we've seen a lot of things. Lucinda's got a lot more ahead of her. It's time to make a stop. Tomorrow you'll be handing in your letter of resignation." The woman wasn't wrong in the slightest. Such an experienced designer was immediately poached by a nice technical research institute. Claire's father no longer believed the promising promises of his former colleagues that all roads were open to him. Fish rots from the head. The industry's leadership was clearly going the wrong way. The wrong way it was only a matter of time. The girl's mother continued to work in her beauty parlor. Claire was safely into the 11th grade. Life did not stop, only the demands and opportunities became different. The key was that the family came out of the alleged circumstances without moral and physical losses. This is a good time to remember the famous wisdom: "God, thank you for taking money." 11th grade. No bright moves in the lives of two once friendly classmates did not produce. Claire has slowed down in her ideas about who is suitable for her as a lover and who is not. She forgot her philosophy about relationships and characters from the celebrated play. All her energies threw to realize her cherished dream to become a stewardess on international airlines. At home with her parents, she kept joking, "My good people. I used to fly around the world as a passenger. Now I want to be useful to people when they travel. It's such a wonderful profession with romantic overtones. I'm with a bunch of brave pilots. I am in a nice, beautiful uniform, and behind the porthole, snow-white clouds surrounding my happiness." The older generation didn't argue. If a girl wants to try it, let her try it. Her knowledge would be enough to enter the Institute of Civil Aviation. Robin did what he could to fulfill Hannah's needs. It would have been foolish to give up her schooling, and there wasn't enough money from the loader's salary to cover her whims. One spring day, when he was about to take his final exams at school, he fell asleep during a counseling session. And it was none other than Claire who helped him out. "Robin, wake up. Wake up." She poked him in the side, shielding him from the evil history teacher with her body. "If our evil teacher sees you like this, you're in trouble. She'll give you a failing grade on your final exam. She'll do it." The boy opened his eyes tiredly and stared at Claire understandingly. Yesterday his beloved had given him a condition: either he would take her to the sea in the summer, or she would find a new sponsor. For the first time he suddenly realized that he was deadly, unbearably, rigidly tired. Even his young body could no longer withstand these fierce physical exertions, when he took the heaviest loads with double payment and tore himself from the last strength. They walked out of the school together. Robin, clueless, tried to follow Claire to her house. She asked him to come over, and he didn't have the strength to refuse. While she put the kettle on and searched the fridge for something tasty, the boy fell asleep in the living room on the soft corner sofa. She didn't bother to wake him up. He had once tried so hard to please her, wooing her, pampering her, giving her a sea of his attention. Well, he can't sleep properly in my house. Especially my parents went to a sanatorium for a month and should have returned only by the beginning of my exams, she thought. Outside the window she smelled lilacs, cherry blossoms, and spring May. Now she would make herself some coffee and sandwiches and go cram for English. Tomorrow was class, and she hadn't even started her notes yet. Robin slept through the day and the night. When he woke up, he didn't even realize where he was. In the kitchen, someone was humming a popular song. It smelled of coffee and fresh baked goods. He instinctively moved toward the tantalizing sounds and smells. In the cozy kitchen with light curtains on the windows was Claire. She was baking pancakes and humming something to herself. "Claire, did I sleep here for almost 24 hours?" he asked. "You're welcome," she said. "I'm alone now. My parents are at sea, while still affordable rates in the sanatorium, and I was left on the farm. Is breakfast ready? Go wash up now." And so Robin became her housemate. The loud bells were ringing in her ears. It was as if this hard time with Hannah and the warm tea and heart-wrenching connection hadn't happened. The sun was shining through the window, bright and almost summer warm. Not a cloud in the sky. The sense of spring blossoms floated through the room. A stack of ruddy pancakes on a plate beckoned with appetite, and next to it a saucer with sour cream, coffee in clay mugs, a jar of condensed milk, a plastic package with jam. He had forgotten that mornings could be so serene and bright. He touched his lips lightly to Claire's before leaving gratefully. She smelled deliciously of pancakes and new blackcurrant jam. For the first time, she didn't pull away. As he said goodbye, he suddenly thought, she's all grown up now, or I'm no longer disgusting, unnecessary, inappropriate for her. He walked to Hannah's house with a heavy heart, urged on by her. The required amount of money he had never been able to earn. Opening the door with the key the woman had given him, he listened for a long time. There was silence in the apartment. Only in the room there were sounds like whispers. He opened the door. On the table was a box with the most expensive phone that his girlfriend had dreamed of. There were two people lying on the bed, talking quietly. "Get out." Hannah threw him in his direction without even batting an eyebrow. "I waited for you yesterday, my boy, and it's late today." The train left, taking the other passengers with it. Finita la comedy. "Put the key to my apartment on the nightstand in the hallway and forget about it. I'm sick of you." Robin left her house without a sound. He felt as if he'd been doused with dirty water by an unscrupulous landlady somewhere in the back of his life. He listened to himself in surprise. He no longer wanted that red-haired, so artificial love, for which he would easily have laid the whole world at her feet if he had had the chance. Nor did he think of Claire. Last night in her apartment now seemed to him a dream, a joke, a mirage, an illusion. He had thrown all his energies into getting away from this shameful city. He would join the army, enlist in the north, become a long-distance sailor, a polar explorer, a submariner, only not to see more of these streets, which brought him nothing but hardship and betrayal. Claire and Robin passed their high school graduation exams without a hitch. She got the prestigious A's and he got the C's. That didn't stop them from getting their diplomas after the day they'd unexpectedly spent together at Claire's apartment. The young people talked sweetly sometimes, but it never got any further than that. It was as if a glass partition stood between them. They could see each other, but they couldn't get closer, despite the fragility of the imaginary barrier. A month later, Claire started packing her bags for the regional center. She was determined to follow her dream of conquering the skies in a beautiful stewardess uniform. Robin left all the extra nighttime unloading jobs behind. Since he was a little older than his classmates, the military draft was just around the corner for him. The girl passed the entrance exams to the institute that trains specialists in civil aviation without difficulty. She put her things in the dormitory, decided to return to her parents for a week, while she has not yet so easily experienced the separation from them. At the train station, unexpectedly met a school friend who saw his family off on vacation. "Claire, what are you doing in town?" he asked. "I heard that you successfully entered the university. You're going to be the pride of our class, a sky wizard on airliners." "You know, Robin, I didn't expect to be such a daddy's girl," she said. "It's only been a couple weeks without them. I miss them. I came here to spend a little more time with them. What are you going to do tonight?" Suddenly, her ex-boyfriend asked her, "You haven't thought about it yet. Is there a proposal?" "Why not?" Robin said with an air of importance. "Let's go to the movie theater and spend some time. I don't have the money, but I can afford to buy a ticket for my friend." They had both grown up. Robin didn't want to puff up his cheeks to show that he was such an important guy. As they say, love us poor, love us rich, everyone will love us. Claire herself had changed. She no longer cared about her comrade's status as before. She was more attracted by the fact that she was always very easy with him. They agreed to meet in the park by the movie theater that evening. Robin didn't take the last row of tickets so that he could be with his girlfriend in the dark seclusion, who had Hannah helped him get close to. He had no desire to kiss Claire, much less to take her to bed. There was a huge distance between the two women, and he sensed it keenly. After a rather interesting movie, they walked home. Robin told his former classmate about his plans to serve in the army and then to get an education. Claire told him the story of her vacation in Crete with her parents. There they once rented a car to see the capital of the island. They were driving along a quiet highway when suddenly, almost next to them, a passenger airliner with burning portholes soared into the sky. Apparently, the local airport was a stone's throw from the road. This stunning sight was the impetus for her future dream. She had already imagined herself walking with a tray of drinks between the rows of seats. Now she was taking real steps towards realizing it. In Claire's entryway, there was an unexpected event for Robin. The girl stood on tiptoe and kissed him herself. "Thank you," she said. "I've been working on my textbooks all last year. Already forgot what it is to go to the movies, carefree to spend the evening in pleasant company." He didn't pounce on her like a kite, but returned her tender kiss, put his arm around her shoulders, pressed her against him for a split second, and then released her. "Claire, marry me," Robin said. "You're always so sweet. It's not for nothing that I used to swoon when you touched my hand at school. You've stirred up all those feelings in me today. I've changed my views on many things in life. I promise to wait for your answer as long as it takes." Claire was stunned. "Robin, you were crazy. And you're still crazy," she began to make her arguments confusingly. "What marriage? I don't turn 18 until October. Ahead of years of study, formation, career in the chosen profession. I have long ago thrown out of my head all silly ideas about princes and princesses. Now I want something else to stand firmly on my feet in life. And there and then think about a husband." He was not offended by her refusal. The main thing here was to indicate his intentions. Perhaps the girl was right. He hurried, voiced them on a wave of emotional impulse. The truth was that he spoke sincerely. He really felt surprisingly good and at ease with her. "I heard you," he said calmly to the girl. "I will not give up my dream of marrying you. I will pursue you again and again. And someday you will realize that I am like in that popular song, The One Who Is Needed." They had ice cream at the cafe. "Tomorrow we'll go for a chocolate-covered ice cream with sprinkles and nuts. We'll have it tomorrow. I've got a stash," Robin suggested. During the week, they had time to eat ice cream and go to the movies a couple of times. They said goodbye in the entryway, as was the custom. A couple of tender kisses as a sign of warmth in their relationship, and then they went home. Robin didn't recognize himself. He was afraid of offending Claire with his overly insistent, frank touches and pushing. He wanted to get to know this girl gradually, in small sips, and someday to know her completely. 7 days later, Claire left to study, and he stayed behind to wait for the summons to the military enlistment office. He didn't get high marks on his school certificate. He hoped with all his might that he would make up for it by serving in the army, where institutions were more loyal. He will eventually get his student card. Claire didn't make it to Robin's send-off. They were now in a different format of communication. All day long, when they were free, they texted each other. Before they left, the guy asked, "Claire, will you be waiting for me after your enlistment? After all, now you only have to serve a year. Can you do that without me?" Claire was at a crossroads. She couldn't understand what it was between her and Robin. Love? Romance? Friendship? A friendly relationship with a hint of romance? It was nothing like that, almost childish kissing in the driveway. It wasn't serious. And Robin's proposal of marriage seemed to her to be a momentary mood, not a global approach to the future. Right now, studying was taking up all her time. Like other, more frivolous future stewardesses, she didn't disappear on dates and parties. Along with English, she took up Asian studies and began to learn Chinese and Korean. Stewardesses with knowledge of Asian realities were valued for their weight in gold. She passed to the second year with all excellent grades in her credits. By summer, Robin had fallen out of favor in the army. There were only a couple of months left before demobilization, and he was ready to snap, to go OL for a long time, to ruin his record with a daring act. Claire had the character trait of making decisions in the blink of an eye. She'd had enough of her parents over summer vacation. August this year had been increasingly cool and rainy. No joy. And Robin is serving in the Caucasus near the majestic mountains, around the national color of the local people, ancient fortresses, the sea, authentic dishes in cafes and canteens. She should fly to him to boost his service spirit a bit. Or are they not real friends and close people? Dad and Mom approved her idea, provided money for the trip, booked her remotely a room in a hotel near Robin's military unit. They didn't get the kids' hopes up. Let the surprise be a complete surprise. 2 days later at the checkpoint, Claire asked for the private she needed from the barracks. Robin didn't even realize at first that she wasn't a mirage. In honor of the arrival of his favorite girl, the command of the military unit was generous. The colonel had signed Robin's leave of absence for 3 whole days. Robin and Claire hugged each other as they walked from the military garrison to the neighboring town and couldn't talk enough. They both felt that they missed each other, that everything was back to normal, that they were so good together, that all their former disagreements were just a mistake. They didn't go to the hotel. They went for a walk around the city first. Claire was so proud of the fact that next to her was a more masculine and handsome man, that she looked at their reflection in all the store windows. In the cafe, they ordered a real Caucasian lamb kebab, warm flatbread with cheese, lots of seasonal herbs and vegetables. Should we drink it all with grape wine? And again, we chatted nonstop. We couldn't believe that we seemed to have wasted so much time we could have spent together. It was late afternoon when they got to the hotel. Robin wanted to book the room next door to Claire's, but she gave him such an expressive look that he hesitated, took her hand, and pushed open the door to a cozy studio with a kitchenette and a huge bed. They fiddled around for a long while longer, watching intermittently some comedy on TV, drinking tea with cookies and honey. The sweets were compliments of the hospitable establishment. Before going to bed, Robin looked questioningly at Claire once more without further ado. She nodded affirmatively and silently too. They spent the remaining 2 days of their stay in love with each other, exploring the local landmark, an ancient fortress with many elegant tower labyrinths, and sampling a lot of national dishes. A lot of time was spent in bed, not thinking about hot embraces. By the evening of the 3rd day, Robin's leave of absence was over. He went to the military unit, and Claire went to the airport. In her hand luggage, she found a first aid kit, which didn't want to tighten because of a packet of pills that kept falling out of it. Claire shoved it back and frustratedly and was stunned. It was the birth control pills her mother had given her before the trip. Impressed by the new places and meeting her boyfriend, Claire had never even remembered them. For a couple of weeks after the trip, the young woman still hoped that the dates with Robin did not end for 2 healthy people who forgot about the existence of contraception. The logical outcome, alas, was that she began to vomit so persistently. The reaction to the smells of food was so strong that here even to the antenatal clinic could not be rushed. Even the gestational age she'd calculated with an accuracy of plus or minus 2 days. And she told Robin the news at once, so he didn't have to beat around the bush. He replied that he was happy, that he would be home soon, and that they would get married right away. They were married when she was 4 months pregnant. It was decided that she would pass the winter session and immediately go on sabbatical. The birth of a baby was more important than any dream of a brilliant career as a flight attendant. And while they rented a small apartment in the regional center, Robin got a temporary job in a car service. The parents also helped the young family waiting for a child. Their son Cameron was born to them as a healthy little boy. While the inexperienced mom everything fell out of hand, the newlyweds moved in with her parents. Where is it seen that the mother did not help her daughter in such a difficult moment? For a whole year, it was all about Cameron. Robin would come home from his job, which he'd quickly found here, and take turns walking with his grandfather in the stroller. Anyone who's raised a baby with love knows how much care and trouble it is. Everyone tried to please Cameron in the sense that he would remain as healthy and strong as ever. Except that Robin was staying late at work more and more often, under plausible excuses. While everyone was out with his son and grandson, he was earning a penny. How did he explain that to Claire? Trouble comes to a house in different ways. When it sneaks in, when it sneaks out, when it sneaks in proudly. Claire's been making friends with a mom in the yard lately. They hit it off for 2 reasons. Their husbands worked together, and their sons were born only 19 days apart. So they had a lot of common interests. One evening, Claire kept glancing at her watch. She was outside waiting for work. Why not? The weather's so nice, it's summer, it's the second battle. Mommy was in no hurry to come home. We can talk about women's things, her new friend said as she looked at the dial. What are you doing, Claire? I'm impatient. Are you waiting for your husband so insistently? But something began to be delayed almost every day. The owner of that auto body shop is getting all worked up over these second shifts. Second shifts? The young woman asked in surprise. Mine has been home for 3 hours, and before my walk with my son went to the supermarket. There is a lock on the gate of the car service center, and the alarm button is blinking. No one's been there for a long time, everything's locked up. My husband says people are on vacation. There's a lot less customers. Claire couldn't believe her ears. The lock's just like a lock, she stuttered. I'm telling you, there's hardly any orders. My husband even sometimes comes home from lunch to take a bath. Can't get him outside with the stroller. Claire's eyes darkened, cat's mute in her soul, leaving sharp scratches of doubt. She quickly picked Cameron up from the sandbox and ran home without even saying goodbye. Her phone calls were not answered by Robin. The caller was out of range. Her mind was a swarm of suspicions and fears. Now she'd just wait for him to get home from work or wherever he was and set things straight. Robin didn't come home that night. I spent the night without sleep. Cameron was fidgeting in his crib. It was as if he could sense that Mommy was worried about something. Robin showed up around noon. Claire, we need to talk, the man announced in a strange, muffled voice. I was tired of lying and twisting. Why do you have to lie every day? Said Robin. I'm in love with another woman. I'm going to pack my things and go to her. Claire felt as if the ground had fallen out from under her feet. Who had said those words now? Her Robin, who had been trying to win her favor for so long. Yes, this is a dream. It couldn't be, because it could never be. Tired, she returned and asked meekly, You're in trouble at work. So you made it all up. Dinner will be ready soon. Let's eat, rest, calm down. Robin stared at his wife with undisguised surprise. Couldn't she hear him? What kind of lunch could there be if he said such things to her? After all, he didn't want to use harsh, cruel words to Claire. He drew air into his lungs and repeated dickishly, Claire, there will be no more lunches. I'm leaving you forever. Our marriage was a mistake. I realize that now. Once again, Claire felt like she was delusional. It was him, her beloved husband, her first man, the father of her son. She looked around helplessly for some moral support. Her legs shook, her eyes swam before her eyes. Was her world going to collapse so suddenly on nothing? What other beloved woman was Robin talking about? Tears sprang from her eyes. She made an effort and rushed to her love's defense for the 3rd time. Robin, what's the story? You're telling me a story? Look at me. It's me, you're Claire. And you're my bestie. Do you remember how heroic you were in getting us tickets to that famous play? And the first time you tried to kiss me in the driveway? And I kept resisting. She didn't know what facts from their shared past she could bring to his argument. He can't leave me. It's nothing. A mistake, temporary oblivion. Even if he does have a crush on someone, they'll get over it together, and he'll be back in the family. But Robin looked at her with empty, cold eyes. He pushed away her attempt to hug him. He moved determinedly into the hallway where their large family suitcase was stored on the mezzanine. Then suddenly he gritted his teeth angrily. How to live, I am bored with my dull, gray love, with the eternal nagging for correctness. I'm already sick of you. Not a drop of fire, fantasy, desire to somehow diversify our relationship. Just boring submissiveness spiced with sweet tenderness. What do you know about what a true lover should be? Claire. His last words struck her heart like a hot iron. What's happening right now is a nightmare. She was about to wake up and everything would be the same. Claire woke up to the sound of the bedroom door slamming shut, a shriek Cameron, and she rushed to her frightened son. She hugged his curly head, kissed his chubby cheeks, nuzzled her nose into his nose, which told her, in bitter bewilderment, that her family life had just come to an abrupt end. She didn't want to live, didn't want to think about anything. When Claire's parents returned from work that evening, they found the young woman in complete prostration. Cameron was quietly fiddling in his playpen, surrounded by a mountain of toys, and his mother lay silent, staring blankly at the ceiling. She had suddenly aged 10 years. It happens, but usually temporarily. There was such a stamp of distress on her face that her father and mother looked at her with horror. The daughter now looked like a living, unconcerned dead man. What could have happened while they were away from home? To their persistent questions, she had so far refused to answer. Claire grieved over her family misfortune. For 3 days she hadn't eaten, hardly drank anything, only got up to go to the bathroom. With enviable persistence, she returned to the couch, to the pillow and the traces of tears. Grandma even had to take time off work to be with Cameron. The daughter wouldn't even pay attention to him. Couldn't talk, didn't want to explain anything. But her parents had already realized that her gloomy stupor was related to Robin's disappearance from the house. They wanted to look for Robin at his parents' house, but Claire looked at them so much that they wouldn't budge. The young people themselves would figure out what the problem was between them. On the 4th day, Claire finally crawled out of her hiding place and started talking to her father and mother. I'm filing for divorce. It's out of the question. And I want to go back to school as soon as Cameron's 2. I'll have to find a good nursery. Will you help me? Of course they supported her, assured her they'd always be there for her. They listened to her story of what had happened in her family, reassured her as best they could. Claire was a bit like a robot now. She lived by inertia, fiddled with her son, did something machine-like around the house, but her eyes remained dead. It seemed that the evil accidents of fate had trampled down her faith in good things. She no longer trusted men now. If she had been betrayed by the one who had spent so much time looking for mutual love in her, what could others do? Robin had started seeing Hannah again about a month before his tough talk with his wife. The woman found him at a car service center, stunned by the news. Guys, your accomplices from the ATO zone threw their boss, they'll be in jail again. And now they are free birds. They want a beautiful life. They think you owe them. They can't clean up their tongue. They can't clean up their tongue. They kept you behind your teeth. Even in your tangential case, you didn't pass. They want to go back to their old trade. But the odds will be different now. You're with them and the whole process from start to finish will participate in the car service business. I'm getting good at it. I got a couple of garages in mind. In them, you will decide the fate of each prey, what to dismantle into parts, where the number on the body rebid and resell. Robin's soul split in two at these words. On the one hand, he was glad to see Hannah again. Claire had been good, but so quiet and peaceful that his cheekbones were starting to droop with longing. He knew by heart how she'd behave with him, and he'd forgotten every time out of boredom. Like warm, like tender, but all childishly naive. No fire and passion, no surprises. Obedient and overzealous. He still remembered how Hannah had involved him in a new plot every time, where each of them had interesting roles to play. On the other hand, associating with former so-called co-workers was dangerous. It would be too high a price to pay for the pleasure of not counting money again. Hannah, meanwhile, was watching his reaction to this conversation and grinned to herself as soon as she saw the greedy glint of unconcealed desire in his eyes. Robin had slammed the hook. She was sure of it. But success couldn't be dismissed out of hand. She knew how to secure it in the safest way possible, so she went straight to the bank. I've missed you, my sweet, yet daring boy. But you're not a boy anymore, Army family son. I followed your life closely from afar. I've always been interested in you. And now you're all grown up and handsome, and you make me want to be near you again. Or do you mind? He didn't mind at all. Now it even seemed to him that he had been writing his book of life on a draft and only now he would start again from scratch. They were in Hannah's apartment in half an hour. He was ready to be her slave again, to get any kind of money, to fulfill her whims, as long as she didn't let him go again. He didn't remember that he had to go home to his wife and son. He would stay with her now for good. But the woman cooled his ardor. "Kitten, I don't want that, and I'll give you time to think about it, even if I turn out to be the last bitch. The remnants of humanity are still alive in me. It was good teachers that made me this way. After several abortions from our leader, I can't have children. But that doesn't mean I don't want to experience the happiness of motherhood too. You men always come here for one thing. No one knows how to look into my soul. So now you, who went to your family, must decide who you want to be with. I'll give you a month. During this time, the boys and I will solve technical matters with the site for cars, make a list of vehicles, so that they are already in mind. Repeating past mistakes of thoughtlessness is no longer an option." Robin didn't want to go home, to think about why he had come home so late, to look Claire in the eye, and certainly not to fulfill his marital duty. His wife was a pretty, affectionate woman, but he realized after marriage that his first fatal school love for Hannah ended long ago, even at the desk where they were preparing for final exams together. Everything between them later had been an attempt to distract himself from Hannah, to tear her from his heart. Somewhere it had fallen in again as soon as he'd seen her today. He would definitely never let her go from him now, at any cost. At home at dinner, eyes downcast to the floor, sluggishly picking at a chicken leg, refusing his favorite salad. For the first time he looked at his son with some distaste, how he would have liked a child with his red-headed bestie, not this well-mannered, proper Claire. Alliances were not to her liking. She'd gone to bed with him like a sweetheart and married him in a hurry. Where the hell did she put her Valentine and Valentine nonsense? Shifter Hunter Hannah is the real deal. He missed her like crazy already. The day after tomorrow, they're going on a case. They decided to start big with a cool, dark Maybach. Hannah liked to go big. He wanted to get back at one of his former admirers who'd declared after a night with her that she was dirty and no match for him. He used her a couple times and tossed her in the trash like a piece of junk. He didn't even thank her with gifts like other lovers. He thought he'd honored her too much already. Hannah felt particularly hurt by his behavior. She thought of her revenge even when he almost threw her out of the luxury car on the road, adding, "A lot of self-importance. You think you can smell it on me. If I wanted to buy a small car for a woman, as you want, you wouldn't be able to afford it. But in reality, it's cheap. I can always find one like that." No one ever knew what went on inside Hannah. But her gut was scorched empty. There weren't even any coals left. So many she'd been through, so many she'd lost. She'd lost count long ago. Always drunk, the same red-haired, beautiful mother. A stepfather who showed her the way into the world of sensual pleasure. High school gym teacher. Struck out with a local gang leader, made her way into the youth gang. She went to see him on a date, and he kept joking about it. "Don't wait up for me, right? I won't punish you. I understand that it's bad for a woman without a man's caress. When I come back, so you'll be with me again. In the meantime, take a walk." I've survived without a man's presence. Only while she was with Robin, a young boy. But even he soon bored her with his puppyish devotion. She didn't need him now, except for business. She waved her finger, and he was ready to do anything for her again. But would it make her happy? I don't think so. She's long since lost all feeling. She turned into a doll, only when she holds a present and a new trinket in her hands. She comes to life for a moment, then falls back into the abyss of memory. Operation Maybach went well. The owner of the expensive foreign car was too sure of his greatness. The car didn't even need to be opened. Its owner had forgotten the card without key access to the ignition button on the bar. Hannah knew perfectly well where he liked to stop for a glass or two of cognac with lemon and sugar. Robin chanted the signal while the victim was getting drunk. After that, it was all a matter of technique. Only a little damage to the wheels on the corner, and the car was so. Pity about the bird. It was a beauty that no one had the heart to ruin. But Hannah was ruthless. She'd shine before her time with such an expensive toy, and half the town would know her. And so do the inmates of my favorite prison. We'll resell it in another town. It'll be used for parts. There are already buyers who want to upgrade their cars. Yeah, the profit margin will be a lot less, but it'll do for now. Learn. It's a start. This won't be our last car haul. The men didn't dare listen to their leader's friend, and they were far less clever than Hannah, who had a marvelous knack for life, and even Robin, who had completed at least 10 years of school. The procedure of disassembly of all the units with the help of hints and Robin's participation was carried out as smoothly as possible. A week later, they were already joking together in the restaurant, celebrating the successful deal. After the party, Robin looked hopefully at his beloved. "I miss you, Hannah. I can't think of anything else." But she just glared back at him and said, "Look at the calendar. There's a circle circled in bold red felt tip pen. 20 days you still have to think, and then either with me or with me to the end. Yeah, I've made up my mind, the moment I saw you again and followed you." But Hannah was adamant. She knew Robin wasn't going anywhere, so she was in no hurry to play family with him. The first car was followed by a second, then a fifth, then a fifth, then a 10th. The criminal ensemble had already lost count. Robin left his wife, quit the car service. Greed was pushing him, taking over, driving him around. Money always seemed tight. In between jobs, they'd binge. Sometimes Robin tried to remember that it would take a long time to fall asleep. His parents always felt sorry for him and didn't understand how he could abandon such a wonderful family and a good woman. And he was all trying grass, sinking lower and lower to the bottom after his red-haired abnormal love. Claire and Robin divorced then surprisingly quickly, without any delays. Claire herself and her parents had insisted that Robin give up their son. They promised that they wouldn't press him for child support. He signed the papers without looking at them, without reading a line. The women found Cameron a great private preschool with a strong group. Her parents became increasingly insistent on sending Claire to the capital city. How long could her sabbatical last? It was time for the student to return to her studies. For the remaining years, she tossed between the institute and her son. Cameron grew up fast, a bright little chatterbox. Claire called him my sweet parrot. She met her ex-husband by chance only once. He was all wrinkled and unattractive, hungover by all accounts. Where had his former statuesque good looks gone? He looked much older than his 23 years. You'd never tell from their looks that they'd once been in the same class. Claire, on the other hand, had blossomed and looked beautiful. In their final year, they had an internship and she lived alone in the dormitory. She wore a stewardess uniform, the beauty of which was added by her eyes burning with excitement. She did not give up her dream to master the Asian direction in air communication. She went to her cherished goal so purposefully that the teachers only marveled at how deeply she could master quite complex foreign languages and scripts. They decided to encourage the successful student. After defending her diploma, she was sent to a transportation company that carries out air transportation of passengers to China. The minimum program in the profession was closed on excellent. All significant routes of airliners flying to Asia, of course, did not start in the regional town where Claire studied the future profession. The destination in her allocation was the large city of Seattle, the main city in their region. At the family council, it was decided that little Cameron would stay with his grandparents in the stewardess's hometown, while she would settle in Seattle, get a little on her feet at work and at home. The airline welcomed the new employee with a modern design, gleaming metal and glass, and a buzz of lively voices. Claire had an interview with the head of department and an introduction to the corporate rules. A knock on the door was answered by what appeared to Claire to be a soft voice with a slight accent. "Come in, freely." A man of medium height and Asian appearance came out from behind the desk to meet Claire. Slanted, intelligent eyes looked inquisitive, but his appearance was not formidable. Rather, it was more disposing. He held out his hand to her. "My name is Bill. I don't need a middle name, because it's too hard for me to pronounce. According to your credentials, you're at my disposal as a stewardess on flights to Beijing. Come on. I'll introduce you to the girls who are here in the office now." Claire watched him move. He had the strength of a warrior and the grace of a panther at the same time. She thought to herself, Asian men are seriously different from our Americans. Bill turned around with a slight smile, as if anticipating her further questions. "I prefer to tell you about myself. I have been living in America for a long time, practically since I was born. My father is American, my mother is Chinese. Does it surprise you that I call America my country? I really do. Seattle was the city where I grew up, got my education, made my career. Claire was very surprised that her first boss had ever talked to her about himself, but he immediately explained his behavior. I am a follower of Confucius's philosophy. I build my life on the principles he bequeathed in his writings: respect for people, loyalty, virtue, righteousness, the pursuit of knowledge, high moral principles. If you are willing to accept these tenets of his, we can work together. Oh my God, Claire thought. Confucius is all I need right now. How lucky I am to have strange men. One next to me didn't want to obey any moral laws. The other has made morality a virtue. Now I'll have to adapt to these intricate philosophical corporate rules. In the stewardess's lounge, Claire was again confronted with the philosophy of Confucius. A beautiful, she'd even say classy, poster hung across the wall that read, "Pick a job you like and you'll never have to work a day in your life." I'd have to agree with that, Claire decided to herself, and began to get to know her co-workers. And then the flights came running, the airliners flew. 8 on the road, a break and back again. Claire soon had everything mixed up, where it was night, where it was day, where it was Monday, where it was Friday. Occasionally she'd break out to her parents' house, where a grown Cameron missed her more and more. As her son's warm hands cradled her head, he whispered softly in her ear, "Mommy, Grandpa and I have already learned the letter A. It looks like a ladder. And the rest of the letters we will still learn." The woman's heart was melting, turning into pliable wax. But she soberly realized that with her flight schedule, taking her son to Los Angeles would be a mistake. Maybe then, closer to high school, he'll grow up even more and will connect, Claire thought. After another visit from her parents, Claire came down with the worst of the flu. Her rented apartment was close to the office and the airfield. She worked the flight smoothly, and then realized on the ground that her temperature was almost approaching the 40-degree mark. She was shaking, her teeth were chattering from the heat, and she could only whisper in a broken voice, "I don't feel well. Everything in front of me is floating." And she passed out. She remembered the rest, vaguely how she found herself at home, how some woman in a medical uniform leaned over her. "Was it an ambulance? Any ambulance?" Claire asked in a weak voice. "You're home," the woman replied. Claire was in a slumber for 3 days, remembering nothing but someone's hands bringing her some herbal tea. Going to the bathroom, literally up the wall, the same strong, gentle hands holding her by the waist. When she woke up on the wide bed, Bill was sleeping next to her. Claire jumped up in surprise. Claire's mind flashed. Where did he come from? Was he really the one who's been taking care of me all this time? I don't remember a thing. At that instant, after a slight rustle, her superior opened his eyes, put his finger warningly to his lips, and said quietly, "Don't ask anything. I found the keys to your apartment in your purse. After you had been given first aid in the cause of your fainting, I took the liberty of escorting you home. You were barely conscious." My wife Gail, he continued. She was gone for good when I couldn't get her out of an equally bad flu. Burned out from the high fever. Her heart couldn't take the strain. She had just recently given birth to our daughter then and was still breastfeeding her. I couldn't. There was nothing I could do. Now our daughter is growing up half orphaned. I've looked at your file, Claire. You have a son, Cameron. He can't be like my little girl. Lie down. The doctor was here this morning. He told me the crisis was over. Claire later learned that Bill had taken a family leave from work. His daughter was now at a children's sanatorium with her daycare center, and no one was waiting for him at home. They had befriended a boss who didn't care if there was gossip at work, what management had to say, or how subordinates would react. Bill explained to Claire in no uncertain terms. "You look like Gail. My heart goes out to you. I can't help it. It doesn't do you any favors. When you meet the man you love, I'll disappear. Until then, just let me be there for you." A thought flashed through Claire's mind, a kind of déjà vu. Misalliance again, as she called the relationship between somewhat different people. The higher powers want a man of a different culture, faith, religion, a fan of Confucius ideas with strange, by her standards, views on life to be around. Is it her destiny to be liked by men from other worlds? At that time, in the city where Claire's parents lived, a criminal gang was celebrating the leader's release from prison in a fancy restaurant. The table, lavishly laden with food, was crowded. Everyone wanted to show respect to their idol. This served time from call to call. In the zone, he often behaved so impudently that he blocked all possibilities to go out earlier on parole to freedom. It seemed to him that in such behavior there was a certain glamour and courage. Hannah sat next to him, grinning, his hand resting carelessly on her shoulder. Robin was the only one who wasn't having fun in all this frenzy. He realized that now he would be pushed far and away. His period of pleasure was over. And was it ever a period? The man quietly got out from behind the desk and went out into the lobby, where he came across a huge mirror. Staring into it, the smooth surface glistening in the light of the lamps, he saw what he had become. A miserable, hunched, pale man with a dull face on which there was no liveliness or joy. What had he wasted his life on? After Claire's illness, Bill acted as if they were now at work together. Everyone took this news for granted. The staff was not envious or nosy. The woman was sure that everyone thought that she and Bill had been close for a long time. And she, after Robin's rebuff about her inexperience in bed, was afraid to return to this area of relations between a man and a woman. On vacation, she brought the now-grown Cameron and Jonathan to Pittsburgh. They took many walks as a foursome, she with Lucinda, Sophia with her daughter Emma. He was very unlike American men, despite growing up in Russia. Apparently, his Chinese mother still managed to instill in him a love of mysterious China, where there is the Great Wall of China. There are so many inhabitants there that some of them live in big cities, not even in one-room apartments, but in some niches, similar to a small pencil case. A bed, a nightstand next to it, that's all the wealth. Claire flew to China regularly, but she always asked herself to make a schedule in such a way as to have time to visit her parents and son in this exotic country. She never really got to know it. Working as a stewardess no longer seemed as romantic as it used to be. After long flights, she was mercilessly tired, and there were a lot of capricious passengers. The woman's life was becoming more and more like a banal routine. Bill froze in mute expectation, and the relationship did not take the initiative, leaving the final decision to her. He touched her hands casually. He'd give her his when she got out of the car, and as time went on, she wondered, was he really insensitive? So she decided to step into the same river twice. Once, after a semblance of a family dinner together in a restaurant, she suggested that he not go home, where there was a nanny, but invited him to her place for a nightcap. He was a wise man and took her hint. "Claire," he said in the morning, "now you know me. I sincerely hope you had a good time with me. Let's think about legitimizing our relationship. I recently bought a small but very cozy house in the suburbs. I suppose the four of us will be perfectly comfortable there. But I'd like to have children with you. People will judge that these two do not burn with mutual passion, do not throw themselves into the maelstrom of love. Oh, come on. Not all marriages are made in heaven. Some marriages are made with mutual friendship and reason. Two people walk through life hand in hand." Likewise, without thinking, Claire never later regretted her choice. Bill was the epitome of warmth, kindness, loyalty, gentleness. On the anniversary of the already old designer in a small provincial town gathered his entire family, his beloved, faithful wife, daughter with her husband, their 4 children. He had something to be proud of. His grandchildren were all like a match. The eldest, Cameron, was already in the 5th grade, followed by Emma in the 4th grade. The twins Jonathan and Michael were younger. They were also in kindergarten. Their mother had completely abandoned her profession as a flight attendant, devoting herself entirely to the younger generation. She could afford it. Her husband Bill had been the director of a transportation company for several years. He loved his large family. He spoiled both his wife and the boys with enthusiasm. After the guests left, Claire and her mother cleaned up the dishes and whispered in the kitchen. The older woman was telling her daughter about a recent incident. "A ragged, dirty man with shaky hands knocked on our door late one night. I hardly recognized him as Robin. He was begging, 'Give me money for a bottle.' My soul is burning. I can't bear it. My parents and brother won't give me a penny." "I see you've already drunk your soul, Robin. Get out of here before I call my husband. Anybody can poke you with a finger and knock you down, I said. What do you know about life? Said her former son-in-law and father of her eldest grandson. I burned myself on the fire of love, but now I'm responsible for my shitty fate. At least pour me a glass out of the goodness of your heart. I gave him a whole bottle of vodka, Claire's mother confessed. He's a missing person, after all. Claire thought again and went to put the clean dishes in the cupboard. Everyone chooses his or her own path. Some of them take the curve, some of them take the hard but straight road. Now, who is to blame for all this? She stopped thinking and went to put the children to bed. She herself had everything worked out just right. Though she did not become for her man the ideal Valentina, the right one who lives in a fictional play. But here she is, real and happy. George sat at the kitchen table and smoked one cigarette after another near the open window. It had been freezing since mid-January, but the cold penetrating from the street into the apartment did not bother the man. He was in such a state that such trifles did not bother him now. Outside the window, a gray, dull dawn was dawning. The meeting with the notary at 11. There was still plenty of time. Vanessa slept sweetly in the bedroom, wrapped in warm blankets. Unlike George, she was clearly happy about the whole situation. And that was strangely repulsive to him. Until a couple months ago, George had thought this girl was perfect. Beautiful, determined, ambitious, smart. She's got a way with words. When necessary, she'll make a joke. When necessary, she'll put you in your place. And most importantly, gentle and loving. A real woman. Next to such men feel strong, necessary. Not like Madison. Eric Madison. George's heart ached again. His wife, after all. She wasn't a stranger to him at all. Despite Vanessa's presence, despite everything that had been going on lately. Madison. Charlotte. Queen Madison. They met while they were still students. The girl was a finance and economics major. George was a law student. No, the guy never particularly dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Since childhood, he read a lot. He especially liked stories about relationships. Love, passion, hate, fear. It was interesting to unravel the intentions of the characters, to speculate about why they acted in this or that way. No wonder that his essays on literature were the most profound and interesting. The teacher even read out some fragments in front of the class. George also drew a lot. His desk drawer was full of sketchbooks, sketches, all kinds of drawings. Fantastic creatures, courageous warriors, just unusual ornaments. Drawing was soothing, calming, and time-consuming. George himself did not understand how it happened. He sat down at the table to do algebra. He distracted himself for a minute to finish drawing another character, and that was it. He fell out of reality. He came to his senses, and only then realized with surprise that he had spent several hours drawing. George was clearly a creative person, but his parents were not happy about it. Mother and father, it seems, agreed only in one thing. Both believed that the son needs a serious profession. Did they agree on anything? And, well, the father had some connections. And so George ended up at a prestigious law school. True, he wasn't the least bit interested in his studies. But what can you do? Parents said that you must study, otherwise you will not achieve anything in life. And George was used to believe his parents and obey them. But at university, he met Madison. George noticed her during his freshman year. She was interesting looking. Not beautiful? No. But there was something aristocratic about her. They didn't call her Queen Madison for nothing. Snow-white skin, beautiful intelligent eyes of the darkest shade, shiny black hair, always smoothly styled, clear cheekbones, a nose with a slight hump and a confident line of lips, and most importantly, regal posture and sharp, but still surprisingly graceful movements. Even later, George learned that Madison as a child attended a ballet studio, which hated with all his soul. Parents insisted, say, the girl must move beautifully. And Madison worked her ass off in ballet shoes all the time she was supposed to. George really understood her. His parents also knew what was best for him. Madison was always busy. She didn't just look like a businesswoman. She was one, participating in some contests and conferences, working part-time for the university. George didn't know how he had gotten so much information about this girl. She didn't notice him at all, didn't even know about the existence of such a modest, quiet guy. And George, no, he wasn't in love with her. He was attracted to a completely different type of girl, but for some reason he wouldn't let Madison out of his sight. George was in his 4th year of college. It was summer weather. The middle of May, the time of credits, the time to get admission to the session. The boy went out for a walk to the ice cream stand. Since morning he had been reading a thick notebook with notes, preparing for tomorrow's test. He decided to take a break. He was about to round the corner of the neighboring house when he heard behind him a loud growl from somewhere far away and a startled exhalation. That sound was what made George turn around. He hadn't expected to see this at all. Madison. Before, the guy had only seen her within the walls of the university. George knew that the girl lived somewhere in the center, renting an apartment, since she herself was not local. From somewhere, either from a village or from a regional town. And here she was, right next to George's house. It's strange, but there was no way to ponder it for long. Two large dogs approached Madison. There had been a lot of stray dogs around here lately. There was a construction site nearby, so the animals lived somewhere behind the fence. The builders kind of fed them at first, but then construction stopped. Temporarily or permanently. George didn't know. And now hungry packs were roaming the neighborhood. There were attacks on people. Just now, two dogs were attacking Madison. The girl saw the look in the boy's eyes. And there was so much hope in her eyes that George, always a little cowardly and indecisive, just couldn't do otherwise. He grabbed a large boulder off the ground and headed straight for the dogs. He thought that if the dogs came at him, at least one of them would be able to hit him over the head with the rock. Maybe even stun the beast for a while. But then what would he do? There's still the other dog. There was no time to think about that. Just like that, George had become a hero. The boy approached Madison and asked, trying to keep his voice firm, not shaking. "Are you okay? They didn't do anything to you?" No, she shook her head, looking at her savior gratefully. "Thank you very much. I was confused." The girl was transforming from a confused and frightened, fragile victim into herself, into Queen Madison. Madison's gaze became firm, her movements and voice became confident. "Yeah, we've got some hungry dogs running around because of the frozen construction site, attacking a lot of people," the girl sighed. "I feel sorry for them, on the one hand. In the end, it's all our fault, humans. Listen, were you in a hurry?" "No," honestly, George replied. "Then can I ask you to walk me to 15 Lipovaya, please? I'm confused about the neighborhood. And I'm afraid of running into dogs again, to be honest. Can you walk me?" George felt like a real hero. Queen Madison herself was counting on him. "Oh my gosh. I will, of course." George deliberately took Madison the long way, even though he could have taken a shortcut through the courtyards. It was just nice to walk and talk to her like that. Madison turned out to be a wonderful conversationalist, intelligent, attentive, understanding. It turned out they liked the same books. Who knew? But no matter how George looped Lipovaya, 15 eventually grew in front of the two companions. "Well, here we are. Thank you again. I'm with the same group. We're studying together for a test." "All right," Madison said. "I'm at Orakov State University. Finance and economics?" I know, George smiled, pleased with the effect. Madison was surprised. "How do you know?" "I go to law school there too. I've just seen you around, that's all. By the way, I have a midterm tomorrow too." Wow, what a small world. "It's not a small world, it's our Orakovskaya," Madison smiled charmingly and disappeared down the driveway. That day, George couldn't think of anything but Madison's deep, dark eyes. At least he was almost ready for his midterm. He'd never had any romantic feelings for this girl before, even though he'd known her, seen her, kept her in his sights. And now that they'd talked, Madison was like a spell on him. It was her pleasant, literate speech, her respectful attitude, her unexpected weakness, her fear of stray dogs. Madison was now drawing George to her like a magnet. The guy hoped they would see each other at the university the very next day. And so they did. Not entirely by accident, though. George specifically went to the floor where the economists were taking their exams. As if by accident, he walked past the classroom where the students were crowded. And he saw Madison. She also noticed him, nodded to the guy, and even hurried to meet him. At first, George and Madison were just friends, talking and walking together a lot. They even went to the movies for movies they both looked forward to. Luckily, they had specific tastes, so they went to such sessions, just the two of them, without extra eyes and ears. George admired Madison, savored her closeness. He wanted very much to take her hand, maybe even kiss it. But she was acting like a friend, like a buddy, and the guy was afraid of ruining everything. That's why he didn't show his feelings. It was better to remain friends than to feel awkward every time they met. He didn't want to destroy the warm buddy relationship that had already emerged. And then they found themselves at a common student party, a disco in honor of the end of the next academic year. Ahead was the 5th year, graduation. Almost the whole road to higher education is behind them. There was much to celebrate. George watched Madison dancing with the other guys and was wildly jealous. No, the girl didn't owe him anything. They weren't even considered a couple. George himself was free to dance with whomever he wanted, but these guys were hugging Madison in the dance. They made him resentful and furious. They called George names, but he didn't show it. He joked and laughed with his friends. He even entered some silly contests. And then, late in the evening when everything was over, Madison herself approached George. The guy noticed that the girl wasn't exactly sober. Officially, strong drinks were forbidden at this party, but of course they were actually present. "Don't you like me at all?" Madison asked with stunning directness. "Of course you do," George said, confused. He hadn't expected to hear that. "I mean, as a girl," Madison explained. "I'm not pretty, but I'm not ugly. Thin lips, tall, too thin. No shape. Do you like other girls?" And Madison was almost right. Until a few months ago, George did like other girls, so-called model girls. But now there was no one prettier or more attractive to him than Madison. I guess now was as good a time as any to tell him that. But for some reason, he couldn't find the right words. Madison, on the other hand, was very talkative. "Haven't you noticed how I feel about you? But we talk so much. And all the time I've been waiting for some sign from you that would make me think you like me too. But all you see in me is a friend, and now I've ruined everything." George shook his head negatively, glaring at the girl. "So be it. At least I'll finally tell you what I think. I'm in love, George, with you. Can you believe it? I always thought I liked guys who were more masculine, brutal, like athletes. I tried to hang out with this basketball player, and he turned out to be a fool. And all the other guys I hung out with were just as stupid. And you're not. You're different. Smart, understanding, real." George smiled. It was nice to hear Madison say that. He didn't know what to say in response, so he just put his arms around her, pulling her against him. The girl rested her head on his shoulder and continued her monologue. "I danced with all those people tonight too, didn't I? Only because of you. Only to make you jealous. But you remained indifferent. It hurt so much." "You don't understand," George sighed. "You're just like me." "What do you mean?" Madison pulled away and looked into George's eyes with interest. And then he did what he'd dreamed of doing for so long. George kissed the girl. They started dating. Quiet, modest law student and bright, successful beauty Madison, so different in temperament and character, but at the same time very similar in many ways. They had so many common, interesting topics of conversation, so many joint activities that both of them enjoyed. George and Madison really were like two halves of the same whole. It was Madison who helped George decide what he really wanted to do with his life. "You're a born psychologist," she once said. "You have a keen sense of people, interested in the feelings and thoughts of others. Try it, take a course. Maybe you'll get somewhere." And George listened. After graduation, he got a job at a law firm, did boring, routine work, got a pittance, and at the same time studied to be an online psychologist. That's what he really enjoyed. This was what he was really passionate about. "I told you," Madison smiled smugly. "I'm almost never wrong." Madison herself, meanwhile, was actively building her own business. She already owned an attire. This choice was not accidental. At school, Madison always studied on excellent, and only her hands were growing out of the wrong place, as the girl herself expressed it. The only problem she had was with labor lessons, where it was necessary to sew and the girl could not do it. Madison tried very hard, but all the same, the products of her classmates came out much more beautiful and neat. "Oh, I'm so bad with my hands." The technology teacher sighed over her students' creations. "No, it's not your thing. And how will you live, such an inept?" "I'm going to open my own attire," Madison promised her teacher. "Of course you'll marry a prince and become a millionaire. Is that what you all think when you're young?" The teacher didn't believe the girl, but she did grow up and opened an outlier. George supported Madison, and she supported him. Madison developed the attire, and George tried himself as a psychologist, began to counsel people. They lived together in a rented apartment. They didn't talk about marriage, but it was implied in the future, as if by itself. And then, Madison's business trip abroad came out of the blue. She had an opportunity to study at a prestigious business school. But it meant a long separation. "It's such a chance. You have no idea," Madison said, her eyes burning with excitement. George, of course, was happy for his beloved, but he was also worried. After all, it was not a matter of 1 month or even 6 months. Madison was to spend about 2 years abroad. How would that affect their relationship? For some reason, George had thought she'd find someone there and wouldn't want to go back at all. But he was wrong. The relationship really didn't stand the test of distance. But the blame for this was not on Madison. For the first time after his beloved left, George wasn't himself. He missed her so much. He'd missed her desperately from the moment he'd left Madison at the airport. He'd been doing everything on autopilot, working in his law office, counseling clients as a psychologist. Did they socialize? Sure, almost every night. Madison looked tired but happy and enthusiastic. "I like everything teachers, practical classes, even hours-long lectures." The girl shared her impressions with George. As usual, he spoke encouraging words and supported her. As time went on, the video sessions became increasingly rare. There was no time for Madison. The course was intense. Sometimes she just didn't have the time or energy to talk to George. He, of course, was getting himself worked up. It seemed to him that Madison had someone else. Their conversations were too superficial, infrequent, and short. Being a psychologist, George realized that it was his complexes. His distrust of Madison and fear of losing her all stemmed from insecurity. It seemed to George that there are plenty of young men around who are both prettier and more successful than he is. Of course, Madison compares and may be thinking about starting a relationship with someone else, someone more deserving. When Madison was around, he saw her eyes full of tenderness and acceptance, felt her warmth and sympathy. But now she was far away, and George began to think that Madison didn't love him at all, that she was worthy of more, that he wasn't up to her level. Madison is a successful beauty who has already started her own business. While she is studying abroad, the business is run by the manager, a former classmate of the girl, the same friend on the way to which Madison was attacked by dogs. And him. He's just a lowly lawyer with a salary of 30,000 rubles and an aspiring psychologist. It remains to be seen if he'll succeed in either of those fields. At this very moment in the life of George appeared Charlotte, a girl who recently broke up with a young man and now felt broken and depressed. That's why she turned to a psychologist. George consulted online. His clients were from different cities, but it so happened that Charlotte was his neighbor. She lived literally 2 blocks away. George realized this when he saw the view outside the window behind the beautiful girl on the screen. Huge, disturbing eyes of an amazing violet hue, long brown hair, cute, and very pleasant facial features. Charlotte was so touching, so soft and feminine. She was not at all like Madison, who was rushing toward her goal and was used to sweeping away all obstacles in her way. Charlotte was 4 years younger than George. She was still in her 3rd year of university, and they had been dating for about 6 years, since high school. Charlotte was certain that they would marry soon. Except that the young man suddenly informed her that he was tired of their relationship. He's stuffy, bored, just bored. The guy wanted to make up for lost time to meet with different girls, to go out with friends nights away. It turns out that he felt deprived of all this because he had been dating Charlotte since 9th grade. For the girl, it was a blow. She worried, held on, looked for faults in herself that weren't there, and blamed herself. Eventually, someone advised the girl to consult a psychologist. Consultations with specialists were not cheap. They were beyond the student's means. But George, he was, after all, a novice psychologist, so his tariff quite satisfied Charlotte. That's how they met. George knew it was unprofessional, but he couldn't help himself. The pretty girl somehow immediately captivated his heart. He felt more confident and stronger around her than he did with Madison. She had long been the unspoken leader of their couple in all matters. Besides, she probably didn't have George to worry about right now, and he was tired of feeling not even second, but fifth or sixth place. Charlotte needed him so much. She listened to him so attentively, and she actually felt better talking to him. All in all, it wasn't hard to get the young beauty to like him. Soon George and Charlotte moved their meetings offline. Their conversations resembled not the communication of a psychologist and a client, but a friendly chat. Then friendship naturally grew into something more, and they both needed it to feel needed, loved, exceptional. Soon Charlotte moved in with George. He didn't want to live a lie, so he told Madison everything honestly. It seemed to George that pain flashed in her eyes. Madison's lips trembled. Red blotches appeared on her cheeks, but she quickly pulled herself together, as she always did. "Well," Madison said, shaking her head, "this is unexpected news. Well, if that's your decision, I won't make a scene. We're both grown up and independent. Good luck with your new relationship." And Madison was off. And just like that, it was easy. No hard feelings, no accusations, no trying to find out the details. George sighed. It only confirmed his opinion that Madison had cooled off on him. Suddenly, that thought hurt. Still, Madison was someone special to George. Even after the breakup, he continued to think about her, even though he was fine with Charlotte. Charlotte seemed soft, malleable, pliable as warm wax. She had grown up in a small country town. Her family still lived there, so she had a somewhat patriarchal, traditional upbringing, and that was the beauty of it. Although as a psychologist, George realized that many of Charlotte's attitudes needed work. Charlotte was studying to be an economist. She'd lived in a dormitory before moving in with George. Her parents were not wealthy, so Charlotte could only rely on herself. She tried to study hard as she wanted to get an education, to get back on her feet. Studying before she met George was her first priority. But she fell in love, lost her head with a young psychologist, and therefore pushed everything to the second-plan: friends, lectures, exams, part-time work. Everything. George was flattered by this, of course. In turn, he tried to do something for Charlotte, worked more to buy her gifts, take the girl to restaurants and cafes, took on some of the household chores, which pleasantly surprised not accustomed to such behavior of men young lady. George bathed in love and admiration, enjoyed care and warmth. He had never felt so loved. Charlotte practically put him on a pedestal. Sometimes George was troubled by jealous thoughts. I wonder if she behaved the same way with her ex. Somehow it seemed she had. Caring and helpfulness were inherent in this girl's personality. Still, George thought about Madison. Such an interesting communication on equal terms he and Charlotte did not get. The girl often did not understand his jokes and almost never knew those authors or those movies that George told her about. And the man at such moments caught himself thinking that he still lacked Madison her wit, insight, directness. And then one day Charlotte told George that she was expecting a child, a very unexpected and untimely piece of news. Charlotte is still a student. George doesn't earn enough to support his family. He's just developing. He plans to study, gain new experience and knowledge. But if there is a baby, the development can be put on the cross. After all, training does not imply large earnings, and the family needs to be fed. George very cautiously suggested to Charlotte to make an abortion. It seemed to him that this was the best solution to all problems. The girl first took offense at him. First she yelled at George, which she had never done before. Then she cried. It was hard for George to look at her like that. He felt sorry for young Charlotte, who of course was also shocked by the news of her pregnancy. But George said, "Hey, don't cry. Do you hear me? Everything's going to be all right. We're going to be fine. You're not going to leave me, and you're not going to leave us now." No, of course not. George pulled her even tighter against him. It's a good thing she couldn't see the look on his face. Confused, upset. He didn't want this baby. He didn't want it at all. No, George saw himself as a father in the future, maybe even a father of many children. But now, it was too soon to start a family. George was living in a rented apartment, working at an unloved and low-paid job, and he was just starting out as a psychologist. And Charlotte, she was beautiful, tender, caring. But George did not think of tying his life with her. It was a pleasant, unburdensome relationship, necessary for both of them the moment they met. George felt as if he had fallen into the trap of decency. Raised from a young age by his mother and father, responsibility kept him from abandoning his own child. Charlotte recovered a little and even began to enjoy the pregnancy. George gained additional clients. Now he was working from dawn to dusk. He had to get the cushion ready for the baby's birth. Charlotte and George applied to the registry office. They decided to do without a lavish celebration, although the bride still dreamed of a beautiful white dress and a wedding with guests and contests. She shared this with George with a slight sadness in her voice. But the girl understood perfectly well they would need the money for the baby. There was no need for unnecessary spending in their situation. George felt inadequate again. He couldn't even fulfill his future wife's wish. Charlotte's a young girl. Of course she wants to feel like a princess at her own wedding. She's involved with a poor rabble-rouser. So she has to shrink and endure hardship from the start. Charlotte was very afraid to break the news of her pregnancy to her parents. You see, my parents were so happy that I got in. I am the first in the family with a higher education. I have so many hopes for me, and now I'll have to drop out. Why? Can I take a sabbatical during childbirth and then you study? No, I have a family now. I know what it's like, all the time it takes. I don't want to be a wife or a mom. School's going to have to wait, and that's why I'm afraid to tell my parents. But I have to tell them, and it's best not to delay. Charlotte decided to go home on New Year's Eve. George offered to accompany her to support her in her predicament, and the bride's parents should probably get to know her. The man was sure he would find the right words to calm Charlotte's overbearing father and her mother. He works as a psychologist for a reason. But the girl had other plans. No, I'd rather go to them myself the first time. No, you don't know my dad? He's a man who's in a hurry. He can say some nasty things to you. He can get a little handsy. George was relieved that it was up to him to offer. Charlotte said no. Well, she knows what's right. Let her really talk to her own people, prepare the ground. Charlotte left and disappeared. She didn't answer her phone. Must have been a bad connection in her small hometown. All she'd managed to do was call from the train station to say she'd arrived. And that was it. George wasn't worried. Why would Charlotte suddenly come home to her family after all? Maybe her parents wouldn't be thrilled that their student daughter would soon make them happy with grandchildren. But they won't beat her up. Grumble, and accept the situation. Especially since the father of the child does not refuse Charlotte and the baby. They're getting married soon. George was enjoying being alone. Turns out he was a little tired of Charlotte. At one point in his life, she was his salvation. Pulled him out of his troubled thoughts, surrounded him with warmth, inspired him. But now her care and helpfulness irritated him. As did the intrusive attention, the almost nocturnal gaze, and a lot of other things. When Charlotte did not arrive on the agreed day, George did worry. The girl was starting lectures, preparing for the session. She could not miss all this without a good reason. The girl's phone was still stubbornly silent. So George went to the university where Charlotte was studying, tracked down her group, talked to a few people. They didn't know what had happened. When George had given up hope, a girl caught up with him in the hallway. Funny-looking redhead, pigtails sticking out in all directions. Looking for July. You must be George, he nodded slowly. Helen, her friend. We're from the same town. She asked me to look you up. And here you are. That's lucky. What about Charlotte? Why hasn't she come back, do you know? Oh, it's a story, it's a nightmare. Charlotte's parents are, very strict. She's their pride. The smartest, most promising kid in the family. They were so excited about their daughter getting in. They bragged to everyone in town, thought she'd become a successful economist. And then you came along and ruined all their plans. Charlotte's father was furious when he heard about his daughter's plans. Pregnancy out of wedlock, more like a wedding. Charlotte was going to drop out of school. She was going to be a good wife, an ideal mother, a housewife, instead of conquering career heights. In general, the strict parent decided no wedding and similar tricks early, and personally escorted his daughter to the clinic, where the head doctor was his former classmate. Even before New Year's Eve, the girl had an operation solved, according to her parents, all the problems, so that the child was no longer. George collapsed upon hearing this. He had seen the joy with which Charlotte had waited for the baby, and he could imagine the state she was in now. What's so wild about it anyway? Charlotte's an adult. She can make her own decisions. What about him? He wasn't even asked for his opinion. That's the way it is with us, Helen shrugged. We're used to listening to our parents. There's no other way around it. And Charlotte didn't go against her mother's and father's wishes either. Through Helen, Charlotte asked him to tell George that it was over between them. She told him not to look for her or try to find out anything on his own. Charlotte would now be studying part-time from home under parental supervision so that nothing like this would ever happen again. That's all she asked me to tell you, Helen faltered, clearly uncomfortable with being the messenger of bad news. She also said that your relationship was a mistake, but she also wished you happiness in your personal life. Thanks to her, too, George shook his head and walked toward the university exit. Later at home, he thought about the whole situation and came to the conclusion that everything had happened for the best. George didn't feel bitter about the loss. He didn't even feel upset. On the contrary, there was a kind of joy because everything resolved itself without his participation. There would be no child with the family. And it wasn't his fault. Charlotte, of course, is very sorry. Such overbearing parents are not to be envied. On the other hand, it's her choice. She could go against her father if she wanted to. Charlotte knew that George would accept her, would not let her down, and yet she gave up a child and the man she loved. That's good. Life went on as usual. Suddenly her work as a psychologist began to bear fruit, and very generous. Soon George left the hated work in the office and gave himself completely to the soul of healing. In relationships he was now more cautious. Romances happened, but the man did not allow any mental intimacy, and even more so the appearance of his partner's thoughts of children, family, and so on. He did not want it all yet. Or maybe the women were not the right ones. The man involuntarily compared them all to Madison, and each time the comparison was not in favor of another companion. They didn't measure up to Queen Madison, not at all. George seemed to feel quite happy and accomplished. His favorite high-paying job, his own apartment, a beautiful car. And yet something was missing. And then fate brought him back together with the one he had been thinking about all this time. By that time, George was already quite a successful and established man. He was counseling people online from all over the United States. There was even a waiting list for his sessions now. George's services were already expensive. The man periodically published books that sold out like hotcakes. Editions he illustrated by himself, so realized another of his talents artistic. Since childhood, George constantly drew something in albums: fantastic creatures, courageous superheroes, animals different. In general, it turned out well. Parents admired, of course, but strongly advised his son to do something more serious, something that will help him in the future, will not starve to death. And it turned out like this. Now George was even asked to illustrate other people's publications. The psychologist's profession was supplemented by a part-time job as a digital artist. He had to take a couple of courses to sharpen his skills, and now George was in high demand as an illustrator. He lived in his beautiful and stylish apartment, drove an expensive car, had savings. In general, he was rightly considered quite well-to-do by his 30-plus years of age. Many at his age have never dreamed of such a thing. George, going to the bar that night, had not expected this meeting. He'd thought Madison had been living somewhere in Los Angeles for a long time. She'd disappeared from social media, so George couldn't keep up with her like he used to. But he thought that with her ambitions, Charlotte has nothing to do in this city. It was too small a town for Queen Madison. But it was she who sat at the bar with her foot on the leg. She was grown up, even well-groomed, stylishly and expensively, but not pretentiously dressed. Impeccable taste, solemn-looking, the same bottomless, penetrating eyes, seeming quite black in the semi-darkness of the bar, and the shiny black hair flowing down her back. Madison usually wore her hair shorter. This was the first time George had seen her like this, and it was a look that suited Madison very well. Madison was here with her friends. They were sitting at the counter since there were no more tables available. They were having a lively discussion, laughing. George felt numb. At first, he even wanted to leave the bar quietly, to run away, because, well, if they met, there would be something to talk about. And George still felt guilty that he had been the cause of their breakup. His infidelity was to blame, to be honest. And the resentment was there too. Madison hadn't even tried to find out then, which meant she was already completely indifferent to him. Maybe she'd even met someone there, in a faraway land. But soon George realized that he wasn't afraid of meeting Madison. On the contrary, he was attracted to her, drawn to her like a magnet, just as he had been in his youth. The man couldn't take his eyes off her. Every move she made, every feature of her appearance, everything evoked complete acceptance. Everything was almost native, his own. She seemed to feel his gaze, turned around. Their eyes met, and Madison smiled at him without a shadow of resentment, without a shadow of contempt. George got up from his seat and moved toward her. They talked all night until morning, retiring to the far end of the bar, where the music was quieter, to enjoy their conversation. And talked. Madison talked about how, living abroad, it was not easy for her, studying from morning till night, unsettled life. What admirers. She did not even think about novels. Simply no strength or time for it, was not purely physically. So George's speculation about other men was false. What did you say the other day about us breaking up? That you were seeing someone else? They knocked me off my game for a long time, Madison said. I even thought about dropping out of school, but then, of course, I pulled myself together. George looked into Madison's eyes and understood. He could feel how hard and sad it had been for her. The guilt was overwhelming him more and more. Well, I got what I deserved for what I did, George sighed. It's not for nothing they say about the boomerang of fate. And the man told about his situation with Charlotte. He didn't forget to mention that he'd been thinking about Madison all these years, and regret, desperately sorry for the breakup he'd initiated. I felt like I wasn't good enough for you, Madison admitted. I thought you needed someone stronger and more successful. And now? What do you think now? Are you worthy of me now? The question made George hot. He knew Madison was asking for a reason. Was there really a 1 in a million chance that something between them was still possible? I'm perfectly capable of handling a gorgeous woman like you right now, George said jokingly, but his eyes were serious. Madison smiled and kissed him herself. That's how they ended up together again. Madison and George had both already reached certain career heights. George was a sought-after psychologist, and Madison ran a chain of attires. Incidentally, the same labor teacher who had once looked down on her was now working for Madison. The owner of the network did not tell the new employee why she chose this particular area of business. But this turn of fate pleased her. The gestalt had finally come to a complete close. George and Madison decided to buy a house. They chose a cottage in a well-appointed village not far from the city. It seemed to both of them that such a place would be better for raising children. Children both George and Madison already felt quite ready for parenthood. The age is quite solid, the material base is created. What's the point of procrastination? To plan heirs began even at the stage of preparation for the wedding. Both went through doctors. George turned out to be perfectly healthy. Madison, on the other hand, had some problems. I wish you'd been a mother sooner, the doctor shook his head. 5 or 6 years ago, everything would have been much easier. But your problems have progressed over the years. There's not much chance now. Madison was upset, of course, but as always, she quickly pulled herself together. She was used to the challenge, used to the struggle. And she thought she'd win this time, too. She always had. George was there for Madison in every way. He accompanied her to her medical appointments. He worked with her to find information about her condition and get her to see the best doctors. As the years went by, the desired pregnancy never came. Strong, unyielding Madison sometimes cried from helplessness. She wanted a baby so badly. So did George. He was ready to give up heirs, if only his wife was happy. George was frightened by Madison's confusion. It wasn't like her. In his world, this couldn't happen. Madison is strong, after all. She never cries, she always knows what to do. And all of a sudden, George tried his best to comfort his wife. When the doctors came to an unequivocal verdict that pregnancy was basically impossible unless a miracle happened, They had a serious conversation. "Madison, this has got to stop. Madison, stop torturing yourself. All these attempts are bad for your health and your morale. Stop torturing yourself. Lots of people live without kids and are happy. That's normal too. Don't you want to have a child, your own son or daughter? Wouldn't you?" "I want, of course, like any other human being, to continue the race. It's an innate instinct, but not at such a cost. Even more, I want to live happily, and for you, my wife, to be happy too. That's my dream. Maybe it's time we accept the situation, let go of our unfulfilled hopes, and move on with our lives. I definitely want a baby, George. You're a man, you probably wouldn't understand. But if this is the way things are, what can we do? What can we do? You just have to accept it. I'll help you," George said. "There are techniques," Madison said firmly. "There are other ways to become parents. Lately, it's been worth monitoring orphanage websites. You don't realize how many orphans there are now, some still in the maternity hospital, some later being abandoned. There's one boy." "No," George responded immediately. "There are definitely no foster children." The man understood perfectly well what Madison was getting at: a foster child, the offspring of someone unknown. George had a prejudice against adoption. Neighbors Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason are good people, kind and smiling. They were always attentive to the local kids and candy treat them, and let them play with their dog, and even sincerely interested in the affairs of the neighborhood children. It was especially pleasant, by the way, but they had no children of their own. George's mother and other neighbors often sighed about it. What good parents Mason and Carolyn would have made, but God didn't give it to them. Too bad. May. And then they did have a baby, a chubby little boy named Stephen, about 4 years old. George was surprised. He already understood then that at first children are very small, they do not walk, do not speak, they are carried in a stroller. But this one was so big at once. Aunt Carolyn herself explained to the local kids that Stephen was a boy from the orphanage. How it happens that babies are left without parents, and some are lucky enough to be taken into a family. George was happy for Stephen even then. He was very lucky indeed. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason are the best parents you can dream of. The boys have taken over Stephen's care. The girls babysat him. The boys took him to their games. Of course, in all things giving in to the little guy. And at first, everyone seemed to like Stephen. And then the kid started to grow up and began to manifest in him qualities that at first simply caused rejection, and then grew into something terrible, ugly, unimaginable. Simply put, Stephen became a monster. In first grade, he started smoking. That's when he was first caught stealing. Stephen did not want to sit quietly in class, hit and insulted children, walked around the classroom instead of sitting at his desk. The teacher couldn't do anything with him. Stephen swore profanities, even though Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason were intelligent people. His foster mother and father were nothing to him. George still remembered how Stephen's parents ran around the yard at night looking for their wayward son. The neighborhood boys helped them. And then there's more. Stephen got mixed up with a bad crowd. He skipped school, smoked, even started drinking when he was only a 5th grader. Theft, vagrancy. The adults often discussed the situation, and all agreed that genes were to blame. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason were portrayed in neighborhood conversations as innocent martyrs who had shouldered the burden for nothing. They were really good parents, loved Stephen, did a lot with him. But the power of genes. Even then, George realized that blood is not water, and that even the most correct upbringing cannot always correct the code that was written by nature for generations. Stephen soon found himself in a prison for juvenile delinquents, maimed someone in a street fight. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason tried to get him out, even sold the apartment. In exchange for a spacious 3-bedroom, they bought a tiny and old house somewhere on the outskirts of town and moved in. So George didn't know what happened to their family next, but assumed that nothing good could be there anymore, unless Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason finally got rid of Stephen. And now, when Madison started talking about foster children, George, of course, remembered his neighbor. No, he was not going to go along with that. Madison did not fully accept his choice. His wife periodically tried to change George's mind, gave seemingly reasonable arguments, talked about positive examples. Only George was adamant. He didn't want him and Madison to turn from happy, beautiful, and healthy people into something like Uncle Mason and Aunt Carolyn so thin, pale, and reserved. No way. Over time, Madison seemed to settle down. She found her purpose in something else. The woman now traveled to orphanages and helped poor, destitute children. It was charity. At one orphanage, she set up a playroom, and at another, a backyard playground with swings and slides. Madison would find out what the problems were in one or the other institution and solve them. Somewhere there weren't enough babysitters, somewhere the roof was leaking, somewhere the students were wearing old, outdated clothes. Madison not only closed the priority needs of orphanages, but also did something more organized directly in the orphanage's circles and sections, so that the orphans could find themselves to show their talents, arranged for children's fancy holidays. Madison got like-minded people. The woman felt almost happy. Although she had no children of her own, but she gave joy and warmth to 1,000 strangers' disadvantaged children. Madison's activities were even written about in newspapers, filmed commercials. George was happy for his wife. Finally, she found herself, realized her maternal instinct in such an interesting way. It was good for everyone. The man himself sometimes took part in the actions, and now he called his wife nothing but the good fairy. Madison laughed and said that she liked the former title Queen better. Something of the former cold and unyielding Queen Madison in her still remained. And yet the wife has changed a lot. Became much softer, more tolerant, calmer. She often talked to George about the babies. You could see that her heart ached for each of them. But thankfully, Madison never spoke of adoption again. George thought his life was now set for many years to come. Except that fate threw him a test again, which he failed miserably. Vanessa was one of his assistants who served as his secretary. A young, dazzlingly beautiful woman who looked like a photo model from a glossy magazine. George himself didn't realize how it happened. He and his team were celebrating another successful project of some kind at the restaurant. Madison wasn't there, she had just left for another city on business. Vanessa asked the chief to dance. George saw her huge mermaid eyes for the first time. So close they looked like two green pools. Just stunning eyes of some kind. George couldn't resist. How is it even possible to be sympathized with such a beautiful girl? They went to Vanessa's rented apartment and spent the night. In the morning, George had no regrets, strangely enough. On the contrary, he felt happy around a beautiful woman. Anyway, they became lovers. Vanessa was just perfect, beautiful, unassuming, passionate. She understood that their relationship was a secret, and did not seem to claim anything at first, and then began to talk about love, the development of their romance, and even about divorce. George didn't understand himself. He was physically attracted to Vanessa. He was dizzy with her green eyes, her slightly husky voice, her scent, her light blonde hair. But Madison, she was his soulmate. George, being a psychologist, couldn't make sense of himself. Could this really be possible? He fell in love with two women at once. All in all, it was a difficult time for George. Now he felt guilty in front of both of them, both his legal wife and Vanessa. The decision had to be made. But how could he do it so that he wouldn't regret it? And then Vanessa pulled a trump card out of her sleeve. Think about it. But I'll give you our own child. Madison won't be able to do that anymore. But me, George hesitated. Indeed, with Vanessa, they might have a strong, full-fledged family. But it was hard to leave Madison, too. She was already family, her own, loyal, dependable. Betray her again. And yet the decision was ripe. George chose Vanessa. He planned to remain friends with Madison, but the man was still hesitant to voice his decision to his wife. Vanessa was rushing him. She was understandable. She wanted certainty. George, however, continued to hesitate. And once again, fate intervened. Something happened that George never expected. One day, Madison said they needed to have a serious talk. The conversation took place that evening in the living room of a house too spacious for a family of two. George was nervous. He felt like Madison had found out everything about him and Vanessa, and was about to start asking him uncomfortable questions head-on. On the one hand, that would be better, at least it would finally be resolved. On the other hand, she wanted to present the situation to Madison in a different way. "I have some bad news for you," Madison began. George tensed. Here it comes. Only further his wife told such a story that worries about the disclosure of the affair with Vanessa seemed to be nothing. "I'm sick, and I'm very sick. I've been diagnosed with an incurable blood disease. I just found out about it recently. It took a long time to get a diagnosis. Why? Why didn't I tell you before? Madison grinned. I just didn't want to worry you too much. I thought it was just a vitamin deficiency or something. And then I got this scary diagnosis. Is there really no cure? George didn't want to believe what his wife was saying. It seemed that anything could be cured nowadays, if only there was money. And fortunately, they had the money. Madison shook her head sadly. She put her hands on George's shoulders. A soothing, warm gesture. She was also comforting him while in this state. Amazing. I don't believe you can't be helped. We'll fight. George was about to leave his wife, but he didn't want to lose her. Like this, permanently, completely and irrevocably. Madison meant a lot to him. She was his own person, his own loved one. He wouldn't give her up to some disease for anything. Remember years ago when you said we should accept the fact that we weren't going to have kids? Accept the situation. That's what I'm doing now. We just have to accept it, Madison said. George shook his head negatively. It wasn't the same, he countered. Again, the tests at the clinic, the consultations with medical luminaries from all over the world. Only now the battle was not for the dream of parenthood, but for Madison's life. George wasn't about to give up. He studied a lot of information about his wife's disease. Now he better understood the situation. Yes, the disease was indeed very insidious and dangerous. Most patients, once diagnosed, died within a year. But there were also exceptions, cases of miraculous healing, and George hoped for that. Of course, he hadn't told Vanessa about Madison's illness. He didn't want to break bad news to someone in that condition. Vanessa agreed with George's decision. She said she was willing to wait until Madison's situation was resolved one way or another. Vanessa was even supportive of George, seeing how hard it was for him. She knew Madison meant a lot to him, but she wasn't jealous the perfect life partner. Madison was getting worse and worse, despite her extensive treatment, and she was slowly fading away. George cared for her on his own, spending her last days. It was hard, realizing that the fight was lost. The man still couldn't get over it. Madison, on the other hand, seemed to have accepted the situation and even calmed down. The woman quite consciously enjoyed every day, realizing that there was not much left. She met with friends, visited, as long as there was strength, beautiful and favorite places. George tried to accompany his wife everywhere, but he had a job and Vanessa needed some attention. Madison sometimes asked him to leave her alone. They talked a lot during this period. I'm grateful to fate for the fact that in my life there is a man like you. The woman smiled at her husband. You always understood me like no one else, felt my soul. That's worth a lot, George said, squeezing his wife's hand and feeling guilty again. It was a good thing Madison didn't know about Vanessa after all. What luck that he didn't have time to reveal his cards in front of his wife. All he needed was a negative experience at such a difficult time. I think about that sometimes too. It's lucky we met, Madison replied sincerely. You're a unique person, the closest to me, she said paradoxically. These words were also true. George understood perfectly well that he was losing a dear person, a close friend, and there would never be a warmer and deeper relationship in his life. Madison left at dawn in her sleep. Quiet and peaceful, an easy end. As many people said later, a nurse slept in the room with her. Her frightened scream woke George, and he knew immediately. The ambulance, the police, filling out paperwork, preparing to say goodbye. It was all a blur. George still couldn't accept the fact that Madison was gone. She was gone. Not anywhere. Where could it all suddenly disappear to? Her sharp mind, her love of children, her determination, her courage. How is that possible? Peter was supported at this difficult moment by Vanessa. She honestly tried to reassure the man, but Vanessa had never felt him as subtly as Madison did. She said things that hurt the man even more. It's all for the best. At least she doesn't have any pain now. And the situation worked itself out. You didn't even have to say anything. George shook his head. How could losing someone like Madison be for the best? Vanessa just doesn't understand anything. There were even words like, think about it, you get all the kids now, you didn't have any, so you're the only heir. And in a divorce, everything would have to be divided in half. George looked at Vanessa in such a way that she immediately realized what a terrible foolishness she had said. The girl tried to remedy the situation. Well, I mean, she got sick anyway. It would have happened anyway. And this is such a benefit. Just shut up, George asked. People came to say goodbye, lots of people. Madison's co-workers and friends. And those she had helped over the years. They came up to George, offering condolences, saying nice things about Madison, and George was proud of her, proud of his wonderful wife. Desperately regretted that he too rarely told Madison how wonderful she was, and yet he was glad that sometimes he did say it. It had been several days since Madison had left, which George still couldn't believe. Then a woman called him, introduced herself as a notary, made an appointment. I invite you for the reading of the will. George was surprised. He didn't know Madison had made a will. Probably she had decided to make it easier for him to receive the inheritance, took care of everything before. Vanessa volunteered to go with George. It would probably be kind of inappropriate if it was okay with you. You're in that state right now. You need support. Vanessa cut Vanessa off. George nodded. She was probably right. He shouldn't even be driving right now. He couldn't even keep his head straight. It would be good to have someone more sensible around. And now George was sitting in the kitchen smoking out the window. It was early morning. Vanessa was still asleep. George was the one with insomnia, unfortunately, and he wanted to go to sleep and see Madison. Maybe even talk to her. George sighed, putting the kettle on, needing to drink strong, hot, black coffee. Maybe that would cheer her up a little. This head felt heavy. George poured the steaming coffee into a cup, sat down at the table again, and thought. He thought back to Madison. Their life, her dreams and plans and desires. Yeah, the world had lost a lot of things. Madison had done so much good for people, for underprivileged children. Vanessa was even seriously afraid to hear from the notary that Madison had bequeathed all her money to some orphanage or children's home. George was distracted from his musings by Vanessa. She flew into the kitchen, anxious, disheveled, but still unrealistically beautiful. We're late, announced the girl in a voice shaking with excitement. I overslept. I don't know why you're sitting there like a statue. George, as if out of a daze, came out, took a sip of coffee that had long since cooled, and began to pack. They were on time, though they got to the office when they were still 5 minutes away from the meeting with the notary. They were lucky no traffic, no accidents on the way. Vanessa looked luxurious, even too luxurious for such an occasion. Her tight dark gray dress emphasized the graceful curves of her figure, her light blonde hair falling beautifully over her fragile shoulders. But George had no time to admire his companion. He wanted to go back 5 years, when Vanessa hadn't been in his life, and Madison hadn't been sick. Come on in, Vanessa said. She turned around on the porch and turned to George, trying to hide her irritation. He grinned. He knew his mistress was eager to know what he'd inherited from Madison. It was a little unpleasant. As they entered the notary's office, an old woman dressed very modestly, even poorly, hurried in. She looked like a beggar. And a girl, lovely, charming girl of about 10 years old. Wavy blonde hair, big gray eyes. George stared and couldn't figure out who this child reminded him of, except whose relative Madison was. Maybe George had met this little girl once before. Just in case, the man politely and kindly said hello to both the grandmother and her granddaughter. The old woman answered cautiously, warily, even grudgingly. But the girl smiled broadly at George. That made him feel a little brighter. Vanessa looked at the old woman and the girl as if they were adversaries, spiders in a jar. She obviously hadn't expected to see them here. Sit down, smiled the notary, dressed in an elegant pantsuit. Everyone present followed her advice. I thought only the deceased's loved ones would be here, Vanessa said, raising her thin eyebrows. Those who appear in the will. That's right, the notary nodded. Vanessa's eyebrows rose even higher. Whether out of surprise or indignation, she threw another contemptuous glance at the older woman and the girl. Are we expecting anyone else? Vanessa asked, putting her foot on her leg. No, everyone is here now, The notary acted professionally and did not react to the negativity of the cranky visitor. She stood up, offered condolences to those present, and said a few warm words about Madison. Then she took out of a large envelope a double-folded sheet of paper, both sides written in Madison's neat handwriting. "This letter is for you," the notary handed the sheets to George. "You can read it here. Anyway, this is where the deceased explains everything to you." George clutched the letter with both hands. He couldn't wait to be alone to read Madison's last message. There was no doubt in his mind that something very important was written there. The notary then began to read the will aloud, as was her custom. As George had expected, a considerable amount of money was bequeathed by Madison to a foundation that supported orphans. Vanessa cringed when she heard the size of the transfer. But George was getting all the real estate, cars, and even the business. The man, however, had no idea what he was going to do with a chain of admirers. He never really got into his wife's business. But it seemed that this business was already quite a well-oiled mechanism. It worked like clockwork on its own. Madison managed to adjust the firm in such a way that everything functioned without her direct participation and control. And then the notary said something that made Vanessa jump on the spot like a scalded woman. Madison had left a large sum of money to a girl named Danielle, the same girl who was now sitting across from George with her elderly grandmother. Danielle hadn't even noticed the amount. She was too young to realize how much money it was. The old lady, however, realized it. She shuddered, turned pale, then even blanched. An obliging woman notary immediately offered the agitated visitor a glass of water. "Who the hell are these people?" Vanessa was indignant. "We don't know them. Are they her relatives? Well, they're obviously not first cousins. Otherwise, the deceased's husband would have known them. What's going on?" "It's all done by law," confirmed the notary. "It's the will of the deceased. A person can name whoever they want in their will. It doesn't have to be relatives." "Who are you?" Vanessa addressed the old lady directly. "You're frauds? Don't get your hopes up. You'll get nothing. I can prove that Madison was incompetent when she signed the will. I mean, she's a sick person. And you probably took advantage of her condition?" Danielle looked at Vanessa, not with fear, no, more like disappointment. George noticed that at the very beginning of the meeting the girl had admired Vanessa. Of course, she's so beautiful, just a photo model. But now the idol was turning into a monster. Screaming, petty, greedy. "Calm down," George said irritably over his shoulder. He himself was not surprised at this outcome. The man realized that his wife was sure to give some of what she had accumulated in her life to charity. The girl and the grandmother are obviously very poor. Madison must have wanted to help them, but why them? And with such a large sum of money. "I'm sorry, I'm not protesting in any way," George said to the old woman. "If my wife has decided so, it's the right thing to do. But I was just wondering, how did you meet Madison? Why did she choose you?" The old woman looked George carefully in the eye. That look. There was judgment in it. And for some reason, pain. "You know," she said in a shaky voice, "read the letter and you'll understand. Danielle, we have to go." The girl slid off the chair with relief. What was happening clearly began to strain her anger and wanted to leave this place with an oppressive, heavy atmosphere. "Let's read the letter," Vanessa demanded as the door slammed shut behind her. "At least we'll know who they are." "Vanessa, you see, I have to read it alone," Vanessa said, her lips tightening resentfully. George was sitting in an old coffee shop he frequented as a student. He had chosen the farthest table against the wall behind the racks of houseplants. It was quiet, peaceful, cozy, and lonely. There was no better place to finally read a letter. Vanessa was not so easy to get rid of. She wanted to be with George when he began to study Madison's message. She even had to raise her voice at her. And now George was here alone with that very letter. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. I wondered what Madison was trying to tell him. "Well, hello, George. That's how the message began. If you're reading this letter, I'm sadly gone. That's a shame, of course. Life is a good thing. Anyway, it's already happened. Then it's time for you to know everything. I love you. You know you love me too. I'm sure you do. Despite your occasional flings." I know about Vanessa too, by the way. I wish I could have seen her face when she heard how much money I bequeathed to Danielle. It must have been fun. George shuddered. So Madison knew about Vanessa. What a nightmare. And he had been putting so much effort into not upsetting his wife. All the energy that should have been going into fighting the disease. Don't think I'm upset about Vanessa. No, I'm not. I get it. You're the kind of man who can't live his whole life with one woman. A creative person who needs inspiration, a muse. George thought about it. Wow. Madison understood him better than he did. Vanessa is just such a muse. But I never, ever doubted that you loved me, didn't I? You were there for me during a difficult time in my life. Supportive, caring, that's priceless. I wasn't so scared with you. You fought so fiercely for me when I knew I was done, when I had resigned myself to it. But you didn't give up until the end. You have no idea what it all meant to me. Thank you for that. And know that you're my nearest and dearest. George felt tears welling up in his eyes. The sharp pain of losing Madison pierced his heart again. Yes, he felt the same way. Madison. She had been someone near and dear to his heart. They were more than just husband and wife. Soulmates. Soulmates. George would go to great lengths for her, and she would do the same for him. Now let's talk about Danielle. She's a wonderful girl, isn't she? I'm sure you've seen her already. She's so sweet. Does she remind you of anyone? I mean, she's a lot like someone who's not a stranger to both of us. I met her a long time ago, 3 years ago. She was just a little girl, a first grader. You know, I help orphanages. Danielle's an orphan too, but at least she has a great grandmother. But she and her grandmother live very poorly. And at that time, things got so bad that the old lady had to put her granddaughter in an orphanage. It was hard for both of them, but the orphanage fed and clothed her. But the great-grandmother couldn't always do that. I saw Danielle at the New Year's Eve performance. The children had prepared a big concert. The girl's great-grandmother was in the audience. She was crying into a soaked handkerchief. A sad sight. The girl attracted my attention first by her appearance. The little beauty reminded me of someone, only I did not immediately realize who. Have you finally figured it out? Or not yet? I asked the teachers about the fate of the little girl and was horrified. A 7-year-old girl had to go through things that not every adult can endure. Danielle had everything to be happy about at first. She lived in a small provincial town with her mom, grandparents. She didn't have a daddy, but it's not uncommon today, is it? A lot of kids grow up without fathers. It's not surprising. Danielle was everyone's favorite. The young mother was very fond of Danielle. It was said that she gave birth to a girl by a man she loved very much, and he abandoned them. He didn't want to be a father, he was scared. Good thing Danielle's mom had good parents. Of course, they did not abandon her daughter in a difficult situation, accepted, supported, and when she gave birth, they helped the young mother with her baby. They lived like that, and the 4 of them, grandmother was engaged in the household, grandfather earned money to feed the increased family, and her mother was studying at the university by correspondence, because now she had a baby in her arms. Danielle grew up a healthy and obedient child. That's what they call a gift child. Her mother adored her. Her grandmother and grandfather doted on her. There was no money in the family, but adults spoiled Danielle as much as possible. Danielle's mother had a dream to go to the sea with her daughter, show the little girl high waves, walk with her along the coast, breathe fresh sea air. When the girl was 4 years old, the grandfather decided to fulfill the wish of his daughter and granddaughter. He saved up some money and planned a trip to the sea in the family car. It was cheaper that way. At first, everything went just fine. The family spent a wonderful vacation on the seashore. All the dreams of Danielle's mother came true in walks on the beach, and a southern tan, and beautiful bright pictures. But on the way back home on the highway, there was a terrible accident. The car lost control and overturned several times, plunging into a ditch. Already later, the cause was established. It turned out that my grandfather had a heart attack right behind the wheel. A long trip, heat, plenty of impressions, a sudden change of climate. A lot of factors came together. This is the result. The driver himself was almost unhurt, but he was not taken to the hospital. The cause of death was a heart attack. His wife died on the spot from her injuries. The daughter, Danielle's mom, was taken to the hospital, but her condition was very serious. The young woman was placed in intensive care. So what happened to the youngest passenger? It's a miracle, but Danielle survived. She got off with a couple of abrasions and a fright, but not a light fright. The girl cried out at night for a long time and often dreamed about this terrible accident. The little girl was taken to her only close relative, great-grandmother Danielle. She had lost her son-in-law and daughter in the accident. Her granddaughter lay in the hospital dying. But the old woman pulled herself together for the sake of great-granddaughter Danielle. After all, in this difficult period needed near a sensible adult person, able to take on all the cares of the girl. The mother of the little girl was in a serious condition, but there was still hope for her salvation. For treatment required money, and a lot of it. So the old lady had to sell the apartment where the once happy family lived. She reasoned as follows: now the main thing to pull Danielle's mom, and money, apartments, unlike human life, it is a matter of gain. When her granddaughter gets on her feet, then she'll earn money. Until then, they can live in a one-bedroom apartment they will somehow fit. This old lady was wrong about the three of them. The treatment didn't work. Danielle's mother wasn't saved. The girl was left an orphan. She had no one in the world but her old great-grandmother. No, there was a father somewhere, but how to find him? The old woman did not know the details of her granddaughter's history. She had no idea where Danielle's father might be. And did he need a daughter if he had already abandoned her? There was nothing to do, so the great-grandmother began to raise her little granddaughter alone. It was hard. At such a respectable age to keep up with a small child, oh, how not easy. And as for the financial side of things, it was a disaster. Danielle's great-grandmother's pension was meager. Her health was also poor, and she couldn't get a part-time job. Then there was Danielle's allowance. It had to be registered and confirmed every year, and it cost the old woman a lot of labor. So much paperwork to collect, so many offices to run through. But the old woman tried, ran, collected so that her great-granddaughter Danielle had at least this minimum allowance. And as if somehow the old woman and the girl lived poorly, saving on everything, already exhausted but kept afloat. And then came the time when Danielle had to go to school. And that was it. The family budget couldn't keep up with the new spending. Great-grandmother got her granddaughter into school, even went into debt. And after that? After that, times were very bad when even bread was not enough every day. That's why the great-grandmother, with a broken heart, made the decision to place Danielle in an orphanage, temporarily, due to her difficult financial situation. And then there was this concert. The stage I saw Danielle, I was hooked by her looks, and the story began. Danielle looks a lot like you. Did you notice same eyes, same look, same brow sweep? And the mole on her cheek, the same mole, exactly the same. I looked at the girl and realized there's no such thing as coincidence. And then it turned out it really wasn't a coincidence. George took his eyes off the letter. How had he not realized that? Danielle really did look a lot like him. It was not without reason that the girl seemed familiar to him. He saw almost the same features in the mirror every day. I started digging deeper. I even had to hire detectives. And I found out, well, don't fall out of your chair or whatever you're sitting on. Danielle is your daughter. I purposely withheld her mother's name before, or you would have figured it out. And I like to keep things intriguing. You know, it's more fun that way. Danielle's mom is Charlotte. Yeah. The same Charlotte you left behind when she was expecting the baby. George wanted to object. It was important to him to prove to Madison that he hadn't abandoned Charlotte. It was the circumstances. Her parents had decided everything for them, sent their daughter for an abortion so that she could study and build a career. And he himself, George, was ready to get married. They even had time to apply to the registry office. Did Madison left thinking that her spouse was such a mean man? That's what great-grandmother Danielle told me, that you left a pregnant Charlotte. Scared, didn't want to be a father, didn't want to take on the responsibility, George thought. Something didn't seem right to me right away. So of course I decided to do some more digging. I found out that you applied to the registry office, but the wedding didn't take place. Why? I tracked down Charlotte's best friend. She told me. The girl's father was against the wedding. He did send his daughter to hospital at first, but it turned out there was nothing she could do. All the deadlines had been missed. Charlotte seemed to love you very much. She begged her parents to let her be your wife, especially since you'd already applied. But my father was adamant. He felt that as a wife and mother, his daughter would never graduate from university. And decided so Charlotte gives birth, lives with her parents, they help with the baby, and she finishes her studies, builds a career, and then does what she wants. Except that then never came. Charlotte, yes, she studied, of course. But the accident happened shortly after she got her degree. Who knows, maybe if she'd stayed alive, she would have found you sooner. She probably would have. Well, Danielle's great-grandmother didn't know who the girl's father was, so she couldn't find you if she wanted to. That's the story. If it wasn't for chance, Danielle would still be without a father. Now, I hope you understand why I left her this much money. She's your daughter. I had to help that little girl, but it wasn't just money, I hope. I think I've given her something much more valuable. I've found her a father. I know how you long for a child, a baby of your own. And here you have a teenage daughter. Interesting, with her own opinions and personality. She's great, George, and she needs you very, very much. And you need her. Just do me a favor, don't make Vanessa the girl's stepmother. She'll make her life a nightmare. Find someone else. A more empathetic and understanding woman. You're worth more than that. And so does Danielle. I believe you're the closest thing to each other. You'll be reunited and live happily ever after. I wish I could be there for you. Love you and kisses. Take care of each other. George finished reading. Only then he noticed that his hands were trembling. As a postscript, Madison had left Danielle's address and a link to a DNA test, which it turned out this amazing woman had managed to conduct secretly from her husband. George had no doubts about the result of that test. A light, fresh breeze blew in from the sea. It was too cold for swimming, but it was a pleasure to walk along the shore. George walked along the sand, holding his daughter's hand. It was hard to get used to, but it felt good to say to someone, "That's my daughter." George, we've missed so many years. Now we're catching up, he thought. They talked a lot, traveled a lot, talked about everything in the world. George felt absolutely happy, and he knew exactly who he had to thank for that happiness: Madison. Amazing, unique, intelligent, sensitive, kind. Sometimes George thought she was somewhere nearby, looking at him and Danielle and smiling contentedly.